So that last thing Feynman said, he wishes that we have the freedom to do science with scientific integrity without pressure, various pressures that are asking you to not have that scientific integrity. And the examples he gave, he gave it the whole speech, which was things like, well, I guess you're the guy who has the money wants more publications, so that goes against scientific integrity. And doing these activities, all these pseudoscientific methods that sacrifice scientific integrity in favor of another goal, uh, this is what Feynman called cargo culting. Now, there's various goals, and the point is, it's not the truth goal. Okay, and so an example is nations that have apostasy laws, the death penalty for apostasy, or not just death penalty, but other things, in prison for leaving your religion. You know, the keeping my scientific integrity means being able to say what I believe about God. But more than that, not even just a truth thing, I want to help my fellow brothers and sisters not face the same suffering that I faced. I was a Muslim for 32 years. If there were more people speaking out, maybe I would have left when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my grandfather wouldn't have. I found out my grandfather was a closet ex-Muslim. Maybe if there wasn't a death penalty, he would have told my mom the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in America, I'm imagining right now, Americans are thinking, what the fuck? This is crazy. What are you saying? Why would he hide it from his child? The reason he would hide it from his child is if you say some information like this to your child and they don't know how to keep it a secret, they can go get in trouble. At least for America, a lot of the prison system, a lot of the prisons acts in a way where they see the purpose of the prison for punishment, and they think punishment will affect behavior, and they think it's a type of learning. They also see it as justice, but there is new. I don't know how new it is, but there are people in the penal system that are trying to change that, and they understand something better, which is it needs to be for reconstruction or rehabilitation. And you do see that word used
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the penal system, but rehabilitation is very different than punishment.
Yeah. Yes.
And and if you just look at the recidivism rates, the rate at which people leaving prison and then having to go back in, the prisons that do better at being more about rehabilitation instead of punishment, they get better. They get lower recidivism rates.
The whole idea of the justice system and the prison system and everything that has to do with it is based on certain moral theory. I personally have issues with it to begin with, but that's probably a different issue. That
It's not just a moral theory; it's a theory about how human learning works.
yeah.
They're making judgments about what to do based on what they believe how the human mind works, and I think their model of the human mind is incorrect. All right, welcome, Usama,
Mhm.
to our live stream. We're going to be talking about Feynman's speech in 1974, Caltech commencement speech, later named Cargo Cult Science. Um, and I don't even know what I'm supposed to say. I'm talking here the whole time instead of you. So,
Well, I want to thank you for hosting me on your podcast and for this event. It's actually a pleasure to talk about the ideas that were presented in Feynman's speech. It's a very rich and powerful speech that has so many different aspects that can benefit us not only those who are doing science as part of their everyday life, but also for people who are interested in learning from what scientists do and infusing that in their own everyday life, and just in what they're doing, whether professionally or just as regular human beings.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people do recognize the science in general for working in all areas of life. Maybe not all. I know a lot of people say it doesn't apply to certain things. I remember my professor telling me science and religion don't mix, something like that.
Well, the thing about science is that had science been something that we intuitively understood, we wouldn't have actually had the struggle and all that effort that we as a species had to put into this in order to learn about the world. So if you look at something like flat Earth, for example, this is an example of a situation where the majority of humans throughout history have thought that Earth is flat. It's something that you can almost even demonstrate with some kind of a rudimentary scientific set of observations. It seems that the sun starts from a certain location, ends in a certain location. The stars appear to be revolving around the Earth rather than the other way around. And yet, it is something that took quite a bit of time, even though people in ancient Greece were able to get a sense of how to detect that this is not true and to even make a measurement of the radius of the planet. This was something that did take a very long time to reach us as a kind of an intuitive thing for everybody right now, or almost everybody. There are still people who think
Well,
that.
I'd like to clarify. I think I get what you're saying. I think what you're saying is like our initial thing was we figure out things by intuition. Like intuitively, we look outside. Yep, the Earth is flat. Um, but I want to, and I know a lot of people think that the scientific approach like has nothing to do with intuition. But if you listen to scientists themselves, they talk a lot about extracting information from their intuition.
Yeah.
So I think there's a barrier there. A lot of people who outside of science think that scientists are all against intuition. So yeah,
Well,
it's not the
yeah.
case.
So what happens here is that intuition gets to become something that you train, in a
Yes,
sense that
yes,
we do have an intuition about something like flat Earth. We have an intuition about how gravity works. This is something that uh, 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 we evolved in the presence of gravity. We have all of our instincts calibrated to account for gravity, and so there is something to say about intuition. Intuition is something that is there. It's just that we have not evolved in a way that we were able to assimilate the mathematical aspects of the world, for example. This is something that we have the equipment to do it, but it's not something that comes naturally. And so that intuition that starts from the basic things that we get from everyday experience is not negated from by science. Rather, it's the other way around. We actually try to expand on this
yes.
to show that there are certain aspects of the basic intuitive understanding of the world that do get preserved, but there are others that need to be modified and to be fine-tuned and reformed, sometimes based on how the world works.
Now, like you said, though, I'm sorry to clarify the clarification of the clarification, but so um, oh, I think I just lost it. Oh, so you talked about training your intuition. So I want to say something that Feynman said in one of his books. I don't remember which one I read it in. Probably the one. Surely you're joking. He described in there. he was describing a lot of his days, um, I think during the Manhattan Project,
Hmm.
and he would describe how he would take another physicist and they would sit down for an hour or two and just play around with some mathematical equations or some concept. And Feynman, the way he said it was, let's do this to develop an intuition about it.
Hmm.
He
Yeah.
used those words, to develop an intuition about it. And that's kind of like, people use different phrases that like, um I want to wrap my head around something. I
Yeah.
think that's the same phrase, same concept. Meaning, like, if you're brand new to it, okay, you're gonna be brand new to it. You don't have any intuition about it. It's no different than if you're the first time getting on a bike. You don't know how to ride it yet. For you to successfully ride a bike that first time, you really have to put a lot of conscious attention on exactly what you have to do. Almost every muscle, not every muscle, but what you have to do, and and then you do that enough, and now it's all intuitive. In other words, we say is second nature,
Hmm.
and you don't have to put any conscious attention to it, but you're still doing all those same things. So that's happening with scientists. They're new to a topic, none of it is intuitive. You dig deep for a while, and now it comes out of you almost instantaneously with no thinking, but there is
Right.
thinking. It's
Yeah.
all
So
under the hood thinking.
So
Yeah.
I can bring up an example from teaching, for example, introductory physics to people who have not learned introductory physics before, something like mechanics.
Hmm.
So we usually now take for granted something like Newton's laws, but this is something that's really highly counterintuitive because of the fact that if you go back, for example, to when Aristotle was thinking about motion and how
So like
motion,
2,500 years ago.
yeah, how motion gets described, he didn't, for example, take into account that friction is everywhere, and so the idea of um, pushing an object and seeing it maintain its motion is not something that you would see in everyday life. And so this is something that's very counterintuitive, and yet the first law of mechanics, as formulated by Galileo and then Newton, is exactly based on the idea that if you give a push to an object, in the absence of any force acting on it, it's going to maintain that motion indefinitely. Or if it's staying at rest, it's going to stay at rest indefinitely.
So the word they use for that is inertia.
Yeah, exactly. So the first law of mechanics is the law of inertia. So this is something that's very counterintuitive, and trying to see how people who are taking the course for the first time are training themselves to assimilate this idea, which does not accord with how we perceive things in everyday life, is basically trying to train that intuition so that hopefully by the end of the course, even though this was not something that you learned growing up, not only as a human, but going back to primates, this is friction is everywhere, and so we don't see things starting to move on their own, unless, for example, there is slippery ice somewhere that would make it easier for that to happen. And so this kind of training process is something that sometimes can be really, really hard for people who haven't seen this before. And it can take some time, but once you're there, once you have trained that intuition, you're actually able to see that actually this actually makes a lot of sense. It's not something that started off as something that's completely counterintuitive, that goes against your rational understanding of the world. In fact, it's something that's perfectly sensible, is in accordance with how you understand things. But of course, the most important thing is to not only be able to experiment, but also to um, uh, uh, um, uh, give some credence to certain assumptions that might contradict assumptions that you had at the beginning. So once you like in any kind of logical deductions, if you're going to be making some kind of a syllogism, you have to start from certain assumptions, and those assumptions are probably the things that you need to work on the most at the beginning.
So I don't want to hit on this too much. Maybe we're getting in too deep on this stuff, but there's a lot of people who think there's aspects of the universe that humans are incapable of understanding. But I never had that conception, and I've seen what scientists claim what science is, and there's some principles, okay, and one of them is anything and everything is possible to be understood by humans, which contradicts that whole idea of some stuff we are incapable of understanding. Do you have anything to say about that part?
Well, I'm a little bit conflicted about it because the principle, the very idea itself, for example, of thinking about the ultimate aspect of the world that we can understand. For example, something that was formulated in the past few decades in the form of what is known as the theory of everything. Right now, this is out of fashion a little bit. People don't actually pursue that as such, but the idea in principle is showing you that if there are certain aspects of the physical world that can be formulated in some mathematical form, there's nothing that should prevent us, in principle, from being able to attain full knowledge of that understanding of the world. So it seems, in principle, possible. But at the same time, you can think about certain aspects, mainly computational ones, but certain aspects of certain problems that are so hard for us to grasp all at once. So you might think of these things as something that AI would probably help us get a better grasp of, getting that holistic view of what's happening in addition to understanding the details. And there are certain people who right now are trying to explore certain frontiers in scientific knowledge using AI and machine learning and things of that sort to maybe push certain boundaries that we wouldn't have been able to push on our own, or if we wanted to rely on our own abilities, would have taken much longer and might not have been achieved the same way. Yeah, so it's I think there are two aspects to this that might be conflicting, and it's a little bit hard to say one definitive thing about it. But I'm
Yeah.
actually very optimistic about the possibility of not seeing any kind of end to our understanding.
So
So
I want to make two clarifications that might put you over to my side.
mm,
And if not, it's okay. We'll make that another episode and we'll get deeper into Feynman's speech. Okay. One, what you were describing seemed to be like we might find it difficult because I'm going to say because currently our intuition isn't there yet, isn't trained yet. Okay. So, and the intuition getting trained a little bit more would help that problem get easier. And the second thing you mentioned AI, it's a tool just like a pencil. When we got the pencil, it made us smarter. Meaning, the way you described it was you used the words like there might be a problem that is too, I think you said big for us to understand at one time. Did you say big?
yeah, so it's
With a
possible.
pencil, it's easier to do that versus not a pencil.
Yeah, so
And AI is just another example of that. So
it's that's possible, and so that's what I'm saying, that um you don't know what you don't know, in principle. And so once we get to that edge where you think that, okay, now we have to start really pushing on that particular fundamental problem to get ahead and see where we can go beyond that. Once we get to that point, we probably would have a better sense of what's possible and what's not possible. Although it's really hard to think about a situation where you use the scientific method and then end up with an obstacle that is insurmountable. That's it. It's the very idea of thinking about that is what sort of problem would that be if the world is constructed in that rational sense that can be formulated in mathematical
What people point to at this point is Gödel's incompleteness theorem,
yes.
meaning that some problems can't be solved. I don't want to get into that. We're going way off topic if we do that. So maybe we'll leave that for another day.
Yeah, that's an yeah. Gödel's theorem is actually one of the more important aspects of what you can say about proofs in particular. We can definitely talk about
Well, I want to let me say the psychological aspect for a moment. If somebody believes that something that they can't learn it, that becomes a psychological barrier, a self-fulfilling prophecy, they will not learn it. If it's a scientist who ends up using that logic to avoid researching something, it's going to be that self-fulfilling prophecy. But like you said, we don't know what we can't know. That means because maybe it's possible and maybe it's not possible and we don't know, you should try.
Yeah, but I wouldn't probably emphasize that individual aspect of this because eventually, right now, knowledge is a human endeavor. It's no longer something that you would say, okay, this sage is working on this particular problem, and therefore this particular person is the one who's qualified to crack it, or that this person has some kind of a special knowledge. We're talking about the human species as a whole. And so that's where this whole idea that if one person is not capable of understanding this, that does not mean that the community as a whole, the community of humans as a whole, is not going to be capable of doing that.
Yeah.
So science right now is no longer an individual endeavor. It's something that
So
relies
what we're
on.
talking about now is what are or not the limits of human intelligence, and that's we should leave that to another topic definitely. Let's get into what Feynman explained, and maybe we will get into this by the end of this little speech.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and this will start playing as soon as I put it on here.
During the Middle Ages, there were all kinds of crazy ideas, such as that a piece of rhinoceros horn would increase potency. Then a method was discovered for separating the ideas, which was to try one to see if it worked, and if it didn't work, to eliminate it. This method became organized, of course, into science, and it developed very well, so that we are now in the scientific age. It is such a scientific age, in fact, that we have difficulty in understanding how witch doctors could ever have existed, when nothing that they proposed ever really worked, or very little of it did. But even today, I meet lots of people who sooner or later get me into a conversation about UFOs or astrology or some form of mysticism, expanded consciousness, new types of awareness, ESP, and so forth. And I've concluded that it's not a scientific world.
So at this point, I just wanted to explain, um, and let me ask you real quick: is it even worth right now talking about any details related to, like the idea that people believe in jinn, demons? Because that freaked me out too when I found out people believe that stuff. Similar to Feynman was freaked out when he saw that people believing in all these weird things.
Honestly, I does not I did not find that really all that strange because I grew up in an environment where everybody believes that. That
So it wasn't weird for you.
it definitely was not, and in fact, so until this day, for example, you would see sometimes people on in debates between Muslims and atheists, or rather atheists who are ex-Muslims, challenging them. Okay, if you're really an atheist, can you go and sleep in an abandoned house, believing that there is no jinn? So we challenge you to show that you don't actually believe in jinn. So it's something so ingrained that it's really it's considered to be.
So So it sounds like people like me and Feynman were in a bubble. 'Cause I've been saying this about myself, by the way. I've been living in a bubble. I didn't know what was outside the bubble. And what was outside the bubble is things like people believe in jinn, people believe in exorcists, and that's people from far away. You know, I've been living in Los Angeles and then Kentucky and Illinois. The kind of people I'm talking about are far away in other countries. But uh, I was also living in a bubble here because I found out people here believe similar things. It's just
Yeah.
that I don't have those friends. They're not my friends. I don't talk to those people.
And it's not only that. Probably, I would say, over there, it's a mainstream belief, as opposed to what you see in the West, where, um, uh, well, the West has gone through a lot of stages since the Enlightenment that basically diminished the potency of these beliefs to a degree that I wouldn't say it's fringe, because right now there are certain revivals of some ideas in, I don't know, in some new age communities that would consider certain aspects of spirituality as overlapping with these older ideas, and then they start to bring some of them up. But it's not to the same extent where you have that same continuity of the belief in the Muslim world since time immemorial. Essentially, it's the same idea, but then it was improved and became more theologically relevant with the advent of Islam.
Well, I want to make clear. I'm guessing people imagine, and I think I used to imagine this too, that the Enlightenment era, which was, I don't know when you would say it started, but the roots of it are at least 1200s. But it's really started kicking in the most of Europe more like 1600s, from
Mhm.
what I understand. And and in a sense, we're still riding on the coattails of the Enlightenment era. And I think you were just saying that we've lost some of it. But I think if during the Enlightenment era, it was a few people that were really participating in it, and the masses were not. That's my guess. Similarly, ancient Greece, people think ancient Greeks were so smart or whatever. Socrates himself was killed by the state. Like it was
Yeah,
normal for them to be against us. Is what I.
yeah, I would probably push back a little bit on some aspects of this. I don't think that, even though we do see certain figures that stand out, Diderot, D'Alembert, all those people, Voltaire, the people who stand out as the big names in the Enlightenment, I don't think that they were the only people who led this. There was a kind of a zeitgeist. It's something that they just expressed the spirit of the era in a certain sense.
Right.
And this would be evidenced by the fact that later on, the whole culture, and it's not just this elite that was now introducing these ideas and promoting them. The whole the whole society as a whole went through some kind of a change. I'm not saying that these people did actually express that spirit fully, because as you're saying, which is definitely true, the masses were out of it. They have nothing to do with what's going on in
Well,
these
they didn't go through any of the education that the Enlightenment people did.
yeah, yeah, and but at the same time, there was something that went on and then created a certain change in society as a whole. So right now, the average person that you would see in a typical Western society that went through that the effects of the Enlightenment is far different from the average person that you would see in many other parts of the world. Even though the culture now has been globalized and many of the benefits of that Enlightenment has been disseminated throughout the world, it's there is some fundamental difference when it comes to the values, when it comes to the general outlook on the world. There is something that happened that started from then. Well, not necessarily started, but peaked at that point and continued on. Um, uh, Somewhat similar in the case of ancient Greece, because again, the culture as a whole, despite the fact that you can talk about the general public who would also again be disconnected from reality, the culture as a whole was so productive, so capable of producing new ideas, of creativity. That's
And just
really
to help us understand, how would you contrast it from the Middle Ages, which was in between ancient Greece and the Enlightenment era?
so. Definitely, there was a great deal of things that happened then that prevented some of that progress that was there, including probably the rise of Christianity and the kind of stagnation that happened when certain political and economic changes took place. So there was something that prevented people from engaging in learning in the same way.
Well, libraries were being burned. The libraries weren't existing that existed previously. That's a big one. And for a small thing that I remember in my research is there wasn't a lot of protection. There was a lot of raiding going on, and every new era there was a new weapon and a new way of killing, and the people who wanted to defend against it, when that new weapon came, they didn't have the defense yet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like, I remember when walls started, castle walls, and those kind of things, and that was a necessary step to stop the invaders. And like during the era when people could invade over water, I bet that wiped out so much potential of humans.
Yeah.
And that's what brought them. That's kind of what caused the Middle Ages, where people didn't have basic freedom of, hey, I can live for a year in this little town without worry of a raiding party. Anyway, okay, so let's continue here.
So I found things that even more people believe, such as that we have some knowledge of how to educate. There are big schools of reading methods and mathematics methods and so forth. But if you notice, you'll see the reading scores keep going down, or hardly going up, in spite of the fact that we continually use these same people to improve the methods. There's a witch doctor remedy that doesn't work. It ought to be looked into. How do they know that their method should work?
I just want to tell the audience real quick. There's a book that I learned something about this, The Underground History of American Education by John Taylor Gatto. This man was a New York City school teacher for 30 years. He won awards like New York State Teacher of the Year, multiple years. And what he discovered is something that explains why this is the case, or at least partially, which was that the education system was designed for the purpose of making us obedient rather than helping us become the great thinkers that we know of that the Enlightenment produced. I'm not going to get into details, but it's something, if you want to get into it, please do check out that book. I am going to have future episodes on the podcast talking about this. And next year on this same day, because I'm going to do this every year, I'm going to try to get someone from the agency that handles. John Taylor Gatto has passed away, but his work is still moving, and I'm trying to get someone to get on the show and let us talk to him about it. And one of the things I learned in there was this basic thing that reading scores have not been getting better. Mm-hmm. Like literacy wasn't getting better throughout it's been 8 generations since American compulsory education started. And the way they solved that was because the reading scores were not getting better and they wanted it to look like it was getting better, they would just change the standards so that the numbers look better. It's totally anti-scientific, by the way. Um, but that's another story. So let's continue here.
Another example is how to treat criminals. We obviously have made no progress, lots of theory, but no progress, in decreasing the amount of crime by the methods we use to handle criminals. Yet these things are said to be scientific. We study them. And I think ordinary people with common sense ideas are intimidated by this pseudoscience.
I want to say one thing about this now. There, at least for America, a lot of the prison system, a lot of the prisons acts in a way where they see the purpose of the prison for punishment, and they think punishment will affect behavior, and they think it's a type of learning. They also see it as justice, but there's new. I don't know how new it is, but there are people in the penal system that are trying to change that, and they understand something better, which is it needs to be for reconstruction or rehabilitation. And you do see that word used
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the penal system, but rehabilitation is very different than punishment.
Yeah. Yes.
And if you just look at the recidivism rates, the rate at which people leaving prison and then having to go back in, the prisons that do better at being more about rehabilitation instead of punishment, they get better. They get lower recidivism rates.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
Yeah,
continue.
yeah. The whole idea of the justice system and the prison system and everything that has to do with it is based on certain moral theory. I personally have issues with it to begin with, but that's probably a different issue. That
It's not just a moral theory; it's a theory about how human learning works.
yeah.
They're making judgments about what to do based on what they believe how the human mind works, and I think their model of the human mind is incorrect. And by the way, I remember there's a friend I have that was in prison, and he's the one who told me a little bit of this stuff. And after he was out of prison, he was making speeches trying to get kids to not go to prison. Okay, but he was focused on this thing where there are prisons doing rehabilitation instead of prisons that are doing punishment, and he was doing talks about this. And anyway, so I eventually would like to get someone who knows all these things to come and talk on the podcast too. So
Well, regarding that, I personally have a lot of reservation about how this is handled to begin with. That sometimes the way that you put culpability on a criminal and assume that okay they are able to distinguish right from wrong, and based on that you have the ability to punish them or to hold them accountable. I think that needs to be rethought in light of mainly biology. Uh,
it sounds like what you're saying is some of the stuff that Sam Harris says.
Sam Harris, and more recently, Robert Sapolsky. He recently published a really, really good book called Determined that has made a big splash because he's a biologist, and he basically goes through the argument of showing how everything that we're doing is determined, and therefore, if you really want to treat criminality properly, you're probably going to start thinking about it as some defect rather than as a moral evil as such. But anyway, this is probably going
Yes,
way
but I'm
off.
glad you said all this, and I said this because if I understand things correctly, you and I are doing another podcast just on this topic.
Yeah, this is something that's very important for me because the idea of free will, which is the basis of all. So, whenever someone is trying to leave religion, the idea of free will is going to come up naturally. okay, if I'm going to be doing this, am I going to be held accountable? Especially in Islam, for example, that has this accounting system of good deeds and bad deeds that you have to. Uh,
It's
uh,
a really
uh,
funny accounting system, though, because you can erase all your sins by going to Hajj. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's
and it's not only that. Supposedly, you can get a pardon, or you can go to hell just because he feels like it. You can actually find verses that show that if he feels like it, if he wishes, if it's what he
based on
desires,
logic or whim. It doesn't clarify.
whim. It's purely whim.
Hmm.
Because if it's logic, then what's the point of
Of saying that.
yeah of presuming that there is some kind of a supreme authority that has that
Oh,
ability.
what I was going to say was, if it is logic, then why would Allah even be saying, "If I want it to happen"?
Yeah,
Because if it's logical, then you would just go by the logic, and you don't have to say anything.
exactly. So if it's something that has to do with logic, or if you're talking about some form of objective morality, then the whole idea of a judge that is capable of arbitrating or presiding over that moral system becomes redundant. And so you have to assume that there's something that's inexplicable, that's something that goes beyond that original law that was there, in order to give him that supreme authority.
Okay, so let's continue here.
So we really ought to look into theories that don't work, and science that isn't science. I think the educational and psychological studies I mentioned are examples of what I would like to call cargo cult science. In the South Seas, there is a cargo cult of people. During the war, they saw airplanes land with lots of good materials, and they want the same thing to happen now. So they've arranged to imitate things like runways, to put fires along the sides of the runways, to make a wooden hut for a man to sit in with 2 wooden pieces on his head like headphones, and bars of bamboo sticking out like antennas. He's the controller, and they wait for the airplanes to land. They're doing everything right. The form is perfect. It looks exactly the way it looked before. But it doesn't work. No airplanes land. So I call these things cargo cult science, because they follow all the apparent precepts and forms of scientific investigation. But they're missing something essential, because the planes don't land. Now it behooves me, of course, to tell you what they're missing. But it would be just about as difficult to explain to the South Sea Islanders how they have to arrange things so that they get some wealth in their system. It is not something simple like telling them how to improve the shapes of their earphones. But there is one feature I notice that is generally missing in cargo cult science. That is the idea that we all hope you have learned in studying science in school. We never explicitly say what this is, but just hope that you catch on by all the examples of scientific investigation. It is interesting, therefore, to bring it out now and speak of it explicitly. It's a kind of scientific integrity, a principle of scientific thought that corresponds to a kind of utter honesty, a kind of leaning over backwards. For example, if you're doing an experiment, you should report everything that you think might make it invalid, not only what you think is right about it. Other causes that could possibly explain your results, and things you thought of that you've eliminated by some other experiment, and how they work to make sure the other fellow can tell they've been eliminated. Details that could throw doubt on your interpretation must be given if you know them. You must do the best you can, if you know anything at all wrong, or possibly wrong, to explain it. If you make a theory, for example, and advertise it or put it out, then you must also put down all the facts that disagree with it, as well as those that agree with it. There is a more subtle problem. When you have put a lot of ideas together to make an elaborate theory, you want to make sure, when explaining what it fits, that those things it fits are not just the things that gave you the idea for the theory, but that the finished theory makes something else come out right, in addition. In summary, the idea is to try to give all of the information to help others to judge the value of your contribution, not just the information that leads to judgment in one particular direction or another. The easiest way to explain this idea is to contrast it For example, with advertising. Last night I heard the Wesson oil doesn't soak through food. Well, that's true. It's not dishonest. But the thing I'm talking about is not just a matter of not being dishonest. It's a matter of scientific integrity, which is another level. The fact that should be added to that advertising statement is that no oil soak through food if operated at a certain temperature. If operated at another temperature, they all will, including Wesson oil. So it's the implication which has been conveyed, not the fact which is true. And the difference is what we have to deal with.
So I want to give a couple of examples, and maybe you can also. I remember many years ago being in the alcohol store to buy some alcohol, and I saw this vodka, and this was when I was in my early 20s, and I was, trying to be thin or whatever, and I'm not sure I had the correct theories about nutrition anyway about this, but I remember seeing a vodka label that said sugar-free. And I thought, that's great. I'm going to buy. Yeah, I did the right thing buying that sugar-free vodka. And I don't remember how I came about this information, but I think I was thinking about it, the physics. And I'm trying to understand, okay, how does this make sense? So let me check the other ones, the other vodkas. They all don't have sugar. Let me check the other types of alcohol. They all don't have sugar. It's a lie. It's a lie. It's just that the other ones weren't smart enough to realize they should also market their product as no sugar. You could have just said no rocks in there. It's also true, but nobody cares about that. Another example. I had a business where I was in the selling cell phones, and Sprint was a company a long time ago, and they advertised their network. They said, we have the best PCS network. And for me, it was very clear because I knew what all the networks were because I was in that business. But other people don't know that Sprint has the only PCS network. So they have the best PCS network and the worst one and the average one and the median one because there's only one. I remember being angry about stuff like that. Oh, actually, I wonder if this is even the same. This is not an advertisement, but I don't even know if it's worth saying it here. I remember watching the History Channel, and it was a documentary that in it they were talking about the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Mm-hmm. Okay, and what they said in there was that some mathematician, whatever, made a model of the Leaning Tower, and in the model, the tower fell. And then the person said in the History Channel, it literally breaks the laws of nature. But that's not how things work. That you see how it's an advertisement? He's trying to say something that would make you interested, to get buy-in, to get you, I don't know, liking the episode, I guess. Because you're
what counts today in the parlance of today as clickbaits.
Yes, and I want to clarify for people because this is not obvious. I can tell it's not obvious. On my podcast, I had someone who's studying to be a physician, and he didn't get it. What I had to explain to him was, so the model that this mathematician made, the model itself does not accurately represent nature. It's an approximation. Actually, all of our physics theories are. So if the model doesn't match nature, you don't say that how do I say this? You don't say that the building breaks nature. You say that the model didn't match nature.
Yeah,
So
sometimes I bring demonstrations of certain basic experiments to class, and for some reason, if the experiment doesn't work as expected, I make a joke. Oh, we broke the laws of physics this time. and then of course I work on trying to fix the whatever that was wrong in the experiment to make sure that it works. But yeah, the idea of modeling and imagining that what we actually have does represent nature fully, that's just a mix of ignorance and hubris and a kind of especially when it comes from a scientist saying that yes, we do know fully how this works now,
Well,
and based on this, this shouldn't happen in a way that deviates from the model. This is actually really very deceptive, and it should not come from a scientist at all.
today at least, let's throw a bunch of people under the bus right now. Okay. Um, After Isaac Newton came up with his theories of gravity, 1600 something, and before Einstein refuted it, okay, which was like at least 300 years later. During that period of time, or maybe not the first 5 years, but at least the last 100 years, the previous 100 years before Einstein, from what I understand, physicists were thinking this is it.
Well,
And that is the same conception that this is perfect. We're not going to find a better one. It's not an approximation. We're done.
okay, yeah. Well, first of all, I would probably not say that Einstein refuted Newton, because what happens actually is that Einstein generalized the theory that you would get from Newton. You can actually
Newton's theory became a special case of
a
Einstein's theory.
special case, exactly. When you're far away from really big masses, or when you're not considering something that's close to the speed of light,
Yes.
and all of classical mechanics can be reduced.
It's really cool if you take Einstein's math formula and pump in those two pieces of information where speed is nowhere near infinity, which means you can treat it as zero and the term goes away. And then the other thing you mentioned, far away from a lot of mass,
Yeah,
something about that term goes away. You do some algebraic manipulation, and what you pump out is Isaac Newton's math
yeah,
formula.
exactly. Yeah,
That's
so
fucking amazing.
yeah, I just wanted to clarify this because of an issue that's happening in recent years, in the kind of postmodern approximate or postmodern interpretation of science, that all science is relative, and any new scientific theory abrogates what came before it. That's not how it happens. It always builds on what.
Well, we still use Newton's theories.
Yeah, yeah. People got to the moon
We
with
still
Newton's.
get taught them in school, and we still use them, and they work. You
Yeah,
just have to know what the limits of it are. And here's the point: if you look at what Isaac Newton came up with, he didn't know what the limits were.
yeah,
If anything, Einstein, you could say, there's one way of wording it. He took Newton's theory and fixed it by showing where the limits are.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So Newton's original version, minus those limitations, is wrong in that sense.
Yeah.
But a lot of this is just semantics, because even what we count as wrong, I mean, there's many definitions you could say about what is wrong, right? Like
Yeah,
everything
so-
we're saying right now is wrong.
Yeah,
compared
but
to the perfect truth.
it's just that some people think, okay, well, Newton's theory now is completely irrelevant. No, that's not true.
Yeah, not true at all.
It-
Yeah.
But going back to your original point, which is the idea that, okay, people think that we have actually reached the ultimate in whatever modeling that we have. This happened so many different times in the history of physics. So at the beginning of the 20th century, well, a little bit before, people thought that everything has already been elaborated, and all that remains is just details now. That was before quantum mechanics and relativity. And it was a big surprise at the beginning of the 20th century, starting from Planck, Einstein, 1905.
Well, I'm guessing today people are on board now with the idea that every one of the theories we have is going to be replaced. And from what I understand, pretty much everyone knows, even outside of physics, they know this basic idea that you know, relativity doesn't mesh with quantum mechanics. If I understand correctly, they don't mesh.
Mhm.
That implies, just like what happened previous to relativity, which was Newton's gravity and Maxwell's electromagnetism also didn't mesh, and Einstein made them mesh. So there's going to be a new theory that makes relativity and quantum mechanics mesh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and Einstein himself tried to get a unified theory, and of course he died before that happened. There was there were so many different attempts for of this sort. Right now, this is one of the biggest problems in physics that is not yet solved, although there are so many different approaches that are trying in some way to get somewhere with it. And the point with this is that it seems, from our understanding of the forces of the main forces of nature, if you just reduce them to four, assuming that you count gravity as a force, then just unifying these together in one model, that should be a theory of everything. And so we get again into that a sense of maybe we have now a full model of how nature works.
And
That's
taking a step further, and I don't claim to understand this. This is more very superficial for me. According to E equals MC squared, and what I've heard about it, energy and mass are two dimensions of the same thing, two manifestations of the same thing.
yes.
So maybe if we find that, we're finding that central thing that causes the four forces. I don't know.
Yeah, so the main issue right now, the three first forces, they do have a way of being unified in the form of the standard model of particle physics. And so we do have a working model that unifies electromagnetism with the two nuclear forces in a uniform
Okay.
mathematical
When
description.
was that?
So that was mainly in the 60s, 70s.
Okay, it's beyond
Uh,
what I know. I didn't go that far.
right. And so now we do have a way of making that description. So, for example, the most recent piece of that model, you've probably heard about that or seen the development, was the discovery of the Higgs boson at the LHC, which was really the last piece of the standard model that
It's what they called the God particle.
yeah, that's a really bad name, but
Well, yeah, I know. I think the reason, my guess for why they were using that term is because they were looking for this single particle, and I guess that means a single formula. And I guess the idea is if there's only one, that's the conception of God because
well,
it's only one.
the Higgs
Or no?
boson is what gives mass to all the other particles. So if you solve
Oh,
the standard model theory fully, what you actually get is just massless particles. And we know that this is not true, since all the particles that we have, whether they are fermions, like in the case of electrons, positrons,
they all have mass.
protons, they all have mass.
You're not counting in photons then.
Well, photons don't have mass. These are the interaction in the electromagnetic theory, and you also have the gluons in gravity.
So
But
yeah, you're speaking beyond what I know, and maybe one day we can do an episode on this.
yeah,
Um,
but the point here is that when you solve the theory without the Higgs boson, everything is massless, and
so it
so
doesn't work out. Okay, so
uh,
having the Higgs boson in it brings mass into the equation into the
yes,
system.
mass
So
is
why did they call it the God theory?
Um, that's one of the reasons. It's a God particle, and that's really
It's
poorly.
the one thing that
Well,
explains the rest. Is that kind of what it
not
is?
not explains the rest, but
Was it more? Was there a marketing guy that said, "What are we going to name this thing? What's going to bring the most attention? We'll call it the God particle." That's what it
well,
is.
well, honestly,
Probably that guy working at History Channel.
I personally actually thought that before the Higgs boson was discovered, I never thought that it was actually going to be discovered. And I remember we were actually in a
God,
talk.
that sounds too beautiful, doesn't it?
It
To be real,
well, it sounds too good to be true
too good
in
to
a
be true.
certain
Yes.
sense, because it starts from a point where um, you go through certain mathematical implications of the theory, and you would expect that there's something like that. Something of this sort happened before. So, for example, the discovery of the neutrino, or the speculation about the existence of the positron. All these came initially from a theoretical.
Weren't they? I mean, weren't they all like that? You always had to find the theory first and then design an experiment that would help you.
Not necessarily. So
What can you name an example of a?
so um, uh, um, uh, things that happened at the beginning, for example, when the structure of the nucleus, and the fact that the proton resides in the nucleus, and
Bohr model?
the Bohr model and the Rutherford experiments. These were conducted before any understanding of the theory itself. Or, for example, the idea that that light is going to have the discrete form that we know in the form of photons. This happened before the introduction of the photon model, and it was Planck who came up with a kind of an explanation that then speculated to try to explain the experiment.
I'd like to dig in your mind about that, but maybe not now.
Yeah, we're going really off
Yes.
topic here.
So let's continue for people.
We've learned from experience that the truth will come out. Other experimenters will repeat your experiment and find out whether you were right or wrong. Nature's phenomena will agree or they'll disagree with your theory. And although you may gain some temporary fame and excitement, you will not gain a good reputation as a scientist if you haven't tried to be very careful in this kind of work. And it's this type of integrity, this kind of care not to fool yourself, that is missing to a large extent in much of the research in cargo cult science. We have learned a lot from experience about how to handle some of the ways we fool ourselves. One example, Millikan measured the charge on an electron by an experiment with falling oil drops, and got an answer which we now know not to be quite right. It's a little bit off because he had the incorrect value for the viscosity of air. It's interesting to look at the history of measurements of the charge of the electron after Millikan. If you plot them as a function of time, you find that one is a little bigger than Millikan's, and the next one's a little bigger than that, and the next one's a little bit bigger than that, until finally they settle down to a number which is higher. Why didn't they discover that the new number was higher right away? It's a thing that scientists are ashamed of, this history, because it's apparent that people did things like this. When they got a number that was too high above Millikan's, they thought something must be wrong, and they would look for and find a reason why something might be wrong. When they got
I just wanted to tell people about this. I looked up. While he was talking, I recognized that this is confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I thought, okay, let me look this up. When did this term get coined? It was coined in the 1960s, previous to this speech. But I guess confirmation bias as a phrase wasn't very common yet. Today, you hear everyone saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I want to say, maybe you could say there's kinds of confirmation bias. The reason there's a bias in this case was people saw Millikan as this. I'm guessing they saw Millikan as this great man,
Mm-hmm.
great scientist. And then if you get a result different than him, oh, I must be wrong. And I think it would be, and I think a lot of people deal with this, by the way. I know I've dealt with this. When I saw somebody that I recognize as way smarter than me, and then they said something, and I happen to disagree, there would be a lot of, oh, well, maybe I'm just wrong. And then I find out later, let's say 2 decades later, oh, no, I was right. They were wrong. I just let myself be fooled. There was a confirmation bias. It's weird, though, confirmation in his direction instead of my direction.
There's probably also an appeal to authority in this case.
Yeah. Which is what this is. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different phrases you can use to describe the same thing or aspects of it.
Well, I might connect this with what we talked about earlier about the Middle Ages. So both in the Muslim and the Christian world during the Middle Ages, people really, really relied on Greek philosophy and mainly Aristotle. So a great hindrance to the advance of science was really
Wow,
sticking to those
I didn't
ideas
know
that
that.
are, so Aristotle was really a big figure in shaping the thought of so many big thinkers that
Well, can I
influenced.
clarify for the audience? This is a guess here. Okay, first of all, there was lots of people before Socrates, which is why Socrates was so amazing. I think 5 centuries before him was building up to Socrates, and then Socrates' direct student was Plato,
Mhm.
and his direct student was Aristotle, and his direct student was a man that took over a big chunk of the world, Alexander the Great, who brought Greek culture and Greek philosophy, including Aristotle, to a huge area of the world. I don't know how far further than Persia, going east. I don't know how
Uh,
far west, but a huge area.
I believe Afghanistan.
Okay. Um, and like if so, what were you saying about Aristotle? People saw Aristotle as this great
Yeah,
philosopher.
so there has been a great influence of Greek thought, as you probably know, that there has been a huge movement of translation into Arabic, mainly assisted by Syriacs who were present in the new found empire in the Muslim world. And they started assimilating some of the philosophy, not in somewhat begrudgingly, because they were not really happy with the influence of that philosophy. There was a great deal of debate that happened in Andalusia, but the main person who was responsible for this was Ibn Rushd Averroes, who was the one who elaborated a lot on the work of Aristotle, and so
In the
that,
Muslim world.
yeah, in the Muslim world. But at the same time, Saint Augustine, for example, in the Christian world, also relied a great deal on Greek philosophy, and so you had these two parallel lines in both worlds, where what is known as scholasticism in the Christian world really relied very heavily on Greek philosophy, and in the Muslim world, this tradition that then depended on the melding of Muslim philosophy with that Greek philosophy in became
And
later on known as Kalam. So, um,
kalam
uh,
meaning like, well, kalam just means words, but it means philosophy, I guess.
yeah, so the way that this acquires a kind of a technical aspect to it, it becomes when you say someone is mutakallim, or someone who's working in kalam, it it means that they are working in aspects of theology that might be considered like natural theology, where
Okay.
you have aspects of philosophy mixed with religion. And the main influence from Greek philosophy was not any of the other philosophers except for Aristotle.
Okay,
So,
so I want to say something. I don't know if this is gonna be good or not, but from what I understand from Karl Popper, Aristotle made a huge, huge, huge mistake that 2,000 years worth of philosophers built their philosophies on that mistake, and it ruined it all in a sense. And this is not really my words. Obviously I'm paraphrasing, but this is from Karl Popper. And just real quick, what the mistake is: Aristotle came up with this philosophy that is now known today as justified true belief. And what it's kind of saying is, in order to treat something as knowledge, it has to be backed up by something else. And that actually creates an infinite loop, which is not possible. And Karl Popper explained why that's wrong by explaining how knowledge is actually gained. And
mm,
what he explains is the scientific approach,
yeah,
which is different than Aristotle's conception. Now, I want to be clear: Aristotle, who was built on Plato and Socrates didn't have that conception that Aristotle had. The the justified true belief stuff.
I'm not specifically pointing to one aspect of Aristotle's philosophy. I'm saying that so many of it has persisted for so long. And I mentioned at the beginning how it affected, for example, our conception of the laws of motion. So that was a big hindrance
Physics
to,
ideas.
yeah,
Yes.
but it also affected so many different things. When, for example, you think about how Aristotle worked in philosophy, in logic, in politics, in poetry. He has so many of these works that became so canonical that they acquired a certain reverence, both for Christians and Muslims, even though Aristotle himself was not revered, but a lot of his ideas persisted, and um, uh, they became part of the frozen dogma of the church and Muslim theology. And so it had this kind of effect of slowing down some of the progress that would have probably otherwise have moved in a different direction.
Well, yeah. So I just want to say real quick then, like the idea of relying on knowledge from the past, I guess you could say there's a relying too much on, in the sense that you just never disagree with anything they do. Similar to this Millikan situation, we definitely don't want to do that. But we also don't want to ignore the past, throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
Mhm.
There was lots of good stuff all the way back to ancient Greece, maybe before that. I don't know.
Well, the one of the cornerstones of doing scientific work is to critically approach anything, never to say, okay, this was done by so and therefore this is an authority figure. We're not going to be
But to
re.
be clear, it's happening in a subconscious way, I think, to all these people. Like when it happened to these people after Millikan, they're subconsciously doing it. I don't think they're ever saying out loud, I'm going to follow him or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Sometimes, let me give you an example from my everyday experience. Sometimes, maybe I would be solving a problem and I would make a mistake. Now, some people in class would not think of it much. Okay, he's the professor, he's the one who's qualified. We're not going to think about it. Other people would point it out. You seem to have made a mistake here, and so you have this split between two different types of people, where someone is willing to think about what's actually being presented here, not based on the fact that this is being presented by an authority figure, but the fact that, okay, this we have a certain set of rules that we're now trying to think about critically, and there seems to have been a mistake here. And so the whole idea is to be able to speak up and say, okay, you've made a mistake here, go back and fix it. And
so I want to explain the other side of the story that you just explained from the perspective of the teachers. What you explained is from the perspective of two kinds of students. I want to explain two kinds of teachers. Um, so I think a lot of people know what kind of teacher Socrates was, but I want to explain what the older version of teaching was. This is in ancient Greece, and I think it's everywhere. The older style of teaching was the student comes to the teacher, and the teacher is the student is supposed to learn what the teacher says verbatim, and the way you judge the student is by how well he parroted the teacher. And the new style, which I'm sure happened before Socrates, but Socrates is famous for it, he's said to act like, with the students, we're equal. You can disagree with me. And actually, based on the method he uses, which is well known as the Socratic method, it's a line of questioning. You don't even give the answers. The teacher's answers doesn't matter.
yes.
So, yeah, the two kinds of teachers and two kinds of students.
Right. So,
You can make a matrix.
in many places right now, not everywhere, but in many places, especially for introductory courses in physics, the Socratic method is really something that's being emphasized very much. This is mainly in what is usually presented as tutorial style, where you present a situation and then you don't really give the answers as such. The students are supposed to debate one another, and the teacher does not act as someone who is presenting the knowledge, but really playing the role of a facilitator to make sure that things are pushed in the right direction, or that
Or going at all.
yeah.
You know, if you ask the right question, it helps it move forward. But by the way, just to be clear to everyone, if you ask the right question, you are bringing knowledge into it.
Yeah, that's
Or,
definitely like so.
yeah.
What I wanted to say with this is that there is a big problem with education, but at the same time, there are people who are thinking about including these really important elements in producing student knowledge that really relies on questioning the knowledge, on talking to each other, debating, and really generating their own knowledge based on just understanding the topic and going critically through the whole thing.
Well, I will say that the best teaching that I got was in university in my physics classes. Okay, but I do remember in fifth grade. My whole 12 years, K to 12, was public schools in America, except for 1 year I was in Syria, fifth grade, 10 years old. The school is called Icarda. It was a European school, and I vividly remember one of the classes where they were doing the Socratic method on us,
Mhm.
and or with us, and I didn't know it by that name, but later when I was studying this stuff, I recognized that that's what they were doing, and uh, so when I said earlier that and what he said too, that the education is kind of screwed up as a system, it's screwed up, but there are individuals who are way surpassing what the system gave them.
Yeah.
And a lot of them happen to be physicists. They don't have to be, obviously. I'm sure there's plenty of Socrates level people that aren't in physics. All right, should we continue?
Mhm.
Got a number closer to Millikan's value, they didn't look so hard. And so they eliminated the numbers that were too far off, and did other things like that. We've learned those tricks nowadays, and now we don't have that kind of disease. But this long history of learning how not to fool ourselves, of having utter scientific integrity is, I'm sorry to say, something that we haven't specifically included in any particular course that I know of. We just hope you've caught on by osmosis. The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
Maybe we can expound on this a little bit for people. Um, we as human beings, or just what if you think of what we are, like, we have no access to perfection.
Mhm.
Okay, we don't even have access to, like, I imagine people think that what we see is perfect, but there are, what do they call them, uh, optical illusions.
Mhm.
If you've seen any optical illusions, that's your mind misinterpreting the sense data. Okay, we don't have direct access to the sense data. It's lossy information, and there's actually many levels. Part of it is the actual sense data, physics wise. Our lens isn't great. That's why you're using glasses. Right? That's the physics level of information loss. But there's another level where the mind is interpreting that sense data. There's another, that interpretation step. If you take a baby just born, even after they've there's a period where their eyes aren't even working yet. It's just blurry. But there's a period where it's not blurry anymore, but they can't tell what is three dimension. They can't tell what is far versus close.
Mhm.
So their mind is not interpreting the way our mind is. Same sense data. If anything, theirs is better because you're wearing glasses. They're not glasses. Okay. By the way, I wear glasses, so not making fun of too many people. Where was I going with this? I even forgot what I was saying. Now I said a joke and I forgot. Okay, I
Yeah.
guess we
So
can.
definitely the sense is, um, there are so many different experiments that would show you surprisingly how poorly not only your vision but also how your brain constructs the whole picture. There is a very, very nice book by uh, the recently deceased Daniel Dennett, about consciousness. It
Okay.
actually goes in a lot of details about these illusions and how the whole thing works. It's not only that book. He has several books that are in that same direction. And the nice thing is that he's not only dealing with this from the perspective of philosophy. He relies a lot on actual scientific research. So the it's actually fascinating to see, and to run some of these experiments and see actually what it is that we're missing. So some of them we can easily detect, like you're saying. So others are not easily understandable. So when I'm looking at something straight ahead, I sense that I have a good knowledge of what's actually there in my peripheral vision, but in reality, experiments have shown that most of this is just constructed, that your actual ability to really create details is for things that are straight ahead. The things that are outside this small cone of vision is just constructed by the brain, and it's really poorly constructed.
It's heavily dependent on what you were expecting,
Yeah.
which is the interpretation part. And in a sense, that's why we're better than babies. But it's also debilitating in a sense too, because not having an expectation might lead you to see that thing better than having one.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Um, and then there's some of the interpretation, not even just sense data. Okay, as an example, one time my father saw my face and I was doing the squinting thing. He thought I was angry. I'm not angry. The sun is right in my face. You know, that's another example, right? I guess my face made the angry look. And
Yeah.
maybe on some level I was angry about the sun, not not about anything else. Um, yeah. So it is really easy to fool ourselves. We get fooled so easily, and sometimes it's surprising that people get surprised when we're fooled. I'm surprised when people get surprised that they get fooled or that I'm fooled. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. This is.
because I can tell that in some areas of their knowledge they expect a lot of foolery, and
Mhm.
in other areas they're not really doing that.
Yeah.
Um, so let's move on here.
So you have to be very careful about that. After you've not fooled yourself, it's easy not to fool other scientists. You just have to be honest in a conventional way after that.
That's what we just talked about. But one thing to add, and I don't know if I'm saying something different than what he said or if it's under the same category. You know, we were saying earlier, if I see someone as a very smart person, there could be an appeal to authority there, but charisma can have an effect.
Mhm.
And one way, okay, charisma is, it's a lot of things, but one of the aspects of it is looking confident in what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, if I look confident in what I'm saying, other people can be fooled by just my confidence in it.
True. Yeah.
And the opposite can happen too. Scientists often are very expressly saying things like, we could be wrong. But then other people who don't really know what science is can look at that and say, oh, that means they're wrong. Look, they're not confident.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
That actually connects with the idea of, so many scientists are actually ill qualified to directly converse with the public. It's like there is a kind of a complete disconnect between what they want to convey and what they actually convey. Now, in certain places where you have you have the scientists needing the support of the public for funding and things of that sort, you end up with a slightly different situation where the scientists actually do become more savvy when it comes to the way that they
You almost have
present.
to use the language that they're used to instead of the language we use in science.
Right, and so creating that kind of bridge between scientific speak, if you will, and public understanding.
I
This
have a
is
lot of
something.
experience with that.
Yeah, this is something that's
Being on Reddit, talking to a lot of people for the last 3 years, I have a lot of experience with that.
um, so there is something to say about some scientists bearing part of the blame in this case, because if you're really trying to deliver something that's trying to reach as many people as possible, you probably should work on looking at how you think about this normally as a scientist, and then looking at what sort of way you can do in order to present that to the public. So
If you're
Feynman
going to
is
be involved in education, yes.
exactly,
Yes.
Feynman is a great example of someone who's actually capable of bridging that gap so seamlessly that he does have the charisma, he does have the ability to present that figure of authority, but at the same time he doesn't give you the sense that he's talking in a completely different language. He's talking in a language that you can understand. In
Yeah.
fact, the famous Feynman lectures, a set of books that have been produced recently based on lectures that he developed. If you read through them, he doesn't follow the same kind of format that you would expect in a regular textbook.
Okay.
He speaks in a way that develops the knowledge from really simple examples and then builds on them in really very intuitive and still powerful ways.
So now we're going to keep playing here.
I would like to add something that's not essential to the science, but something I kind of believe, which is that you should not fool the layman when you're talking as a scientist. I was a little surprised when I was talking to a friend who was going to go on the radio. He does work in cosmology and astronomy, and he wondered how he would explain what the applications of his work were. Well, I said, there aren't any. He said, yes, but then we won't get support for more research of this kind. I think that's kind of dishonest. If you're representing yourself as a scientist, then you should explain to the layman what you're doing. And if they don't want to support you under those circumstances, then that's their decision. One example of the principle is this. If you've made up your mind to test a theory, or you want to explain some idea, you should always decide to publish it whichever way it comes out. If we only publish results of a certain kind, we can make the argument look good. We must publish both kinds of results.
So I would like to give an example. This is a situation I wanted to talk about as a separate episode during this live stream. It's a recent thing I learned about. DuPont in the 1950s developed this technology which came from tank technology in World War II. And it was initially used on tanks, but they found out it was good for pushing away water. And they ended up using it on pans for non-stick Teflon.
Mm-hmm.
And workers in the manufacturing site started getting sick. And they did some scientific research, even if it's not really official, like, you might imagine what official scientific research looks like. But if you do something like this is supposedly what they did. They took 5 of their employees, laced some cigarettes with this chemical, let them smoke it without letting them know what was in it. And they all got sick. That's scientific research. Even they all got sick. Like there was no statistics to worry about. 100% fail. You didn't need to do like fancy double-blind studies and statistical models and all that. It was very clear. This is they hid the information. They didn't tell anyone. They kept going on decades producing the Teflon, and it wasn't just the pans that were harmful, but the byproduct was harmful too. The byproduct was waste that ended up in landfills, unwanted by and unknown by the people who own the landfills, by the way. There was doing so much lying in all of this. And the reason I bring it up, it's so important because today it is said that 99% of humans have this chemical in us. And the reason it is still in us, it's what's called, it's in the category of forever chemicals. Forever chemicals are chemicals that our bodies don't know how to get rid of. And the reason we can't get rid of them is, if people can understand how evolution works, okay? If we evolved with chemicals in our bodies over millions of years, you might imagine we evolved methods to get rid of bad chemicals. But if you introduce a chemical to our bodies that is new to nature, which this Teflon chemical was, it's called C8. It's a carbon chain of 8 with a freon on the end. That doesn't exist in nature naturally. We made it. Evolution never worked on getting rid of it from a body, so we can't. And apparently maybe they're thinking 200 forever chemicals, not just this one. So a man that kind of discovered all this, and he was a lawyer that went after DuPont and helped win almost $1 billion settlement for 3,500 cases. He's still working on this, and I tried to get him on the show. I only learned about this recently, so I didn't give him enough time. He replied back saying he has a conflict. Maybe next year he will be on the show.
Well, this is actually also very similar to the situation with the cigarette companies that did actually know about the harmful effects of cigarettes and then continued on promoting their product. And in fact, sometimes my understanding is that the promotion was that it's actually healthy in certain ways. I can't bring examples right now, but that's my understanding, is that sometimes it was promoted in a very positive light. And it was only through a lot of hard effort to show that this is not the case, in order to actually start providing warnings and so on. But I guess the point here is, if you have some financial interests or financial stakes in the matter, and you have some scientific truth, then it's not just possible, but it's more than probable that the people who are going to have those interests affected are going to hide or...
Well, I want to be clear that the kind of people that are willing to do that are different than the kind of people unwilling to do it. And maybe it is the case that the people that are not willing to do it wouldn't end up in those CEO positions.
Yeah, it's there are, unfortunately, the fact that in order for you to do some kind of research, you have to put in money. There is no such thing as just taking pencil and paper and just do research in your mind. You have to actually have some kind of funding for your research. That dependence of scientific research on money would be actually something that funding agencies, governments need to be really mindful about. And this is something that's very delicate.
Well, another element of this is, we have the government who's supposed to be there to protect us, at least the way it is today. It wasn't this way 250 years ago. It's there to protect us from these companies doing these kinds of things. And they don't seem to be very successful. If anything, sometimes it seems like the effect is they end up protecting those companies instead of protecting us.
Yeah, the fact that there are lobbies and people who are trying to push certain agendas means that money can go both ways.
Well, lobbies, that would affect the Congress. The people in the government that I'm talking about is like, I don't even know which department it is, but this is the executive branch. These are people who I know this happens because this happened in a few other scenarios. People will work in. I'm going to switch to Boeing for a moment, okay? Later in this show, I'm going to be talking with Ellie Schargenheim about Boeing. And if anyone knows about what's going on with Boeing, basically they're throwing away scientific integrity and their engineering of their planes in favor of money. And that's why we're having these extra plane crashes and things like that. And there's actually a man who recently, I just saw this video, spoke. He works for Boeing as an engineer, and I don't think he works for them anymore. I don't know. And he was in front of in a Senate hearing explaining what Boeing is doing. So what routinely happens is somebody will be working for Boeing high up in there, and they also want to later work for the FAA, which is the government body that's supposed to be regulating Boeing. And because they want to make that hop, no, the reverse is happening. An FAA employee, because they want to make the hop to work for Boeing, they try to be nice to Boeing. And there's a lot of cases where these people flip back and forth. It happened with the cigarette companies. How are you going to trust somebody that works for the government to protect us from a company when they flip back and forth between that company and the FAA and the department? And I know there's newer-ish laws that recognize this and try to prevent the switching. You know, if you worked for the FAA, you should never work for any of the companies that it's regulating. Okay, so let's continue.
I say that's also important in giving certain types of government advice. Supposing a senator asked you for advice about whether drilling a hole should be done in his state, and you decide it would be better in some other state. If you don't publish such a result, it seems to me you're not giving scientific advice. You're being used. If your answer happens to come out in the direction the government or the politician like, they can use it as an argument in their favor. If it comes out the other way, they don't publish it at all. That's not giving scientific advice. Other kinds of errors are more characteristic of poor science. When I was at Cornell, I often talked to the people in their psychology department. One of the students told me she wanted to do an experiment that was something like this. It had been found by others that under certain circumstances, X, rats did something, A. She was curious as to whether, if she changed the circumstance to Y, they would still do A. So her proposal was to do the experiment under circumstances Y and see if they still did A. I explained to her that it was necessary first to repeat in her laboratory the experiment of the other person, to do it under condition X to see if she could also get result A, and then change to Y and see if A changed. Then she would know that the real difference was the things she thought she had under control. She was very delighted with this new idea and went to her professor. And his reply was, no, you cannot do that because the experiment has already been done and you'd be wasting time. This was in about 1947 or so, and it seems to have been the general policy then to not try to repeat psychological experiments, but only to change the conditions and see what happens. Nowadays, there's a certain danger of the same thing happening, even in the field of physics. I was shocked to hear of an experiment done at the big accelerator at the National Accelerator Laboratory, where a person used deuterium in order to compare his heavy hydrogen results to what might happen with light hydrogen. He had to use data from someone else's experiment on light hydrogen, which was done on different apparatus. When asked why, he said it was because he couldn't get time on the program, because there's so little time and it's such expensive apparatus to do the experiment with light hydrogen on this apparatus, because there wouldn't be any new result. And so the men in charge of programs at NAL are so anxious for new results in order to get more money to keep the thing going for public relations purposes. They are destroying, possibly, the value of the experiments themselves, which is the whole purpose of the thing. It is often hard for the experimenters there to complete their work as their scientific integrity demands. All experiments in psychology are not of this type, however. For example, there have been many experiments running rats through all kinds of mazes and so on, with little clear result. But in 1937, a man named Young did a very interesting one. He had a long corridor with doors all along one side where the rats came in, and doors along the other side where the food was. He wanted to see if he could train the rats to go in at the third door down from wherever he started them off. No, the rats went immediately to the door where the food had been the time before. The question was, how did the rats know? Because the corridor was so beautifully built and so uniform that this was the same door as before. Obviously, there was something about the door that was different from the other doors, so he painted the doors very carefully, arranging the textures on the faces of the doors exactly the same. Still, the rats could tell. Then he thought maybe the rats were smelling the food, so he used chemicals to change the smell after each run. Still, the rats could tell. Then he realized the rats might be able to tell by seeing the lights and the arrangement in the laboratory like any common-sense person. So he covered the corridor, and still the rats could tell. He finally found that they could tell by the way the floor sounded when they ran over it. And he could only fix that by putting his corridor in sand. So he covered one after another of all possible clues, and finally was able to fool the rats so that they had to learn to go in the third door. If he relaxed any of his condition, the rats could tell. Now, from a scientific standpoint, that is a number one experiment. That is the experiment that makes rat-running experiments sensible, because it uncovers the clues that the rat is really using, not what you think it's using. And that is the experiment that tells exactly what conditions you have to use in order to be careful and control everything in an experiment with rat running. I looked into the subsequent history of this research. The next experiment, and the one after that, never referred to Mr. Young. They never used any of his criteria of putting the corridor on sand or being very careful. They just went right on running rats in the same old way and paid no attention to the great discoveries of Mr. Young, and his papers are not referred to, because he didn't discover anything about the rats. In fact, he discovered all the things you have to do to discover something about rats, but not paying attention to experiments like that is a characteristic of cargo cult science. Another example is the ESP experiments of Mr. Rhine and other people. As various people have made criticisms, and they themselves have made criticisms of their own experiments, they improve the techniques so that the effects are smaller and smaller and smaller until they gradually disappear. All the parapsychologists are looking for some experiment that can be repeated, that you can do again and get the same effect, statistically even. They run 1 million rats. No, it's people this time. They do a lot of things and they get a certain statistical effect. Next time they try it, they don't get it anymore. And now you find a man saying that it is an irrelevant demand to expect a repeatable experiment. This is science? This man also speaks about a new institution in a talk in which he was resigning as director of the Institute of Parapsychology. And in telling people what to do next, he says that one of the things they have to do is be sure they only train students who have shown their ability to get psi results to an acceptable extent, not to waste their time on those ambitious and interested students who get only chance results. It is very dangerous to have such a policy in teaching, to teach students only how to get certain results rather than how to do an experiment with scientific integrity.
So he just described a similar thing in logic to what we were saying from the beginning about the two kinds of teachers. The kind of teacher, the old style teacher was, we're going to judge you by how well you copy me.
Mhm.
And that's what's happening here. They don't want the students that can't get the exact same results as the teacher. The opposite of science.
It can actually also go to a larger scale when it comes to funding agencies. So there is safe research and not so safe research. Safe research would be the one where you're probably going to be getting the grant because you're building on work that has been done in a very specific way. Not so safe research is going to be more adventurous, trying to maybe push some boundaries and maybe try to question new things or have try to make some gamble about something that could or could not yield a result that you don't know ahead of time if it's going to lead somewhere. And so, unfortunately, this is also something that's causing some stagnation in the progress of.
So you're saying, I'm guessing what you're saying is these entities that choose what to fund, they're leaning on safe research and away from the unsafe.
Yeah, and this is unfortunately the case, and so you end up with a huge number of papers appearing on basically the same topic, maybe making small modifications or making uh,
In
uh,
physics too?
in physics too. I'm talking about this I'm mainly talking about physics in general, but
Okay.
I do have some idea about what's going on in psychology and medicine about how effective this is, but in the case of physics, there's a great deal of papers that uh, are being funded because of the fact that they are reinforcing ideas that have already been discovered. And maybe I'm not saying necessarily that this is wrong as such, because obviously, if you arrive at a result that has been confirmed many times, then a good idea would be to reconfirm that or to elaborate on it. But at the same time, it's stifling certain amount of creativity that would be needed to go a little bit beyond. And this is something that's actually very much needed in the foundations of physics right now, because we know that we are at an impasse in many areas. And so the funding itself is a big problem.
So I have a question for you. First of all, what you told me is new to me. I never thought about it before. Um, can you try to put your thinking into cancer research? Do we have the same problem in that kind of area?
What I know about medical slash psychological research is that there is a problem that has to do with reproducibility of research. So this has been an ongoing crisis now for several years, and it seems that many of the papers that are being presented seem to be lacking in scientific rigor, and so the reproducibility is the main issue there. I cannot speak too much about the details. This is not my field, but I know that that this is a major thing that's going on.
Well, let me be more clear about my question. That seems adjacent to my question. My question, more clearly, is you know how you said the people who fund research are leaning towards safe research and away from unsafe. Are they doing that with cancer research?
I would probably say it's not only cancer research; it's any kind of research that is going to have some pharmaceutical implications, because
So I guess if I'm a company and I'm like, all right, let's make the new cancer solution, I guess it would make sense. Let's put research money into something that's close to being figured out
I would probably
rather
say that.
than some brand new area where there's some, I don't know who does this. Is it a physician? Some physicians saying, "Hey, I have this really new idea." And then nobody picks up his project because it's the unsafe category.
I would say probably that's the case. I cannot speak more definitively about this because this is not my field.
I need to bring in an expert on that and ask him that question.
But I would say probably with how big pharmaceutical companies are, that there is a lot going on when it comes to what sort of research is something that gets funded eventually, whether it's governmental or private funding. There's a lot of problematic aspects for how research is selected and how it gets directed.
Hmm. All right, let's continue here.
So I have just one wish for you. The good luck to be somewhere where you are free to maintain the kind of integrity I've described, and where you do not feel forced by a need to maintain your position in the organization, or financial support, or so on, to lose your integrity. May you have that freedom. Thanks for watching.
Every cell of each plant and animal contains genetic information coded onto the DNA molecule. The model represents...
I just wanted to see that through the end. I don't know why. It's to me, it feels like sniffing a flower or something. You know what I mean? I don't know how these artists do stuff like that. It's beyond what I know. So that last thing Feynman said, he wishes that we have the freedom to do science with scientific integrity without pressure, various pressures that are asking you to not have that scientific integrity. And the examples he gave it the whole speech, which was things like, well, I guess the guy who has the money wants more publications, so that goes against scientific integrity. But and doing these activities, all these pseudoscientific methods that sacrifice scientific integrity in favor of another goal, this is what Feynman called cargo culting. Now, there's various goals, and the point is, it's not the truth goal. Okay, and so an example is nations that have apostasy laws, the death penalty for apostasy, or not just death penalty, but other things, in prison for leaving your religion. The keeping my scientific integrity means being able to say what I believe about God. But more than that, not even just a truth thing, I want to help my fellow brothers and sisters not face the same suffering that I faced. I was a Muslim for 32 years. If there were more people speaking out, maybe I would have left when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, my grandfather wouldn't have. I found out my grandfather was a closet ex-Muslim. Maybe if there wasn't a death penalty, he would have told my mom the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in America, I'm imagining right now, Americans are thinking, what the fuck? This is crazy. What are you saying? Why would he hide it from his child? The reason he would hide it from his child is if you say some information like this to your child and they don't know how to keep it a secret, they can go get in trouble. You know what I'm saying? So he keeps it from us. I think that is the case with a lot of people.
But even within the U.S. itself, if you have a big enough Muslim community, you can actually, maybe even regardless of the size of the community, if you just have a Muslim family, that's going to be an issue within the family itself, trying to live within that within the confines.
Yeah. So it's like my grandfather didn't want my mother to have troubles with everybody else, not even just the family, but the whole society. Social outcasting.
Yeah, I think there are many people, even within the U.S., within a Western society, if they are trying to leave their religion, and specifically I'm talking about Islam, but there are other religions as well that have this issue. They are trying essentially to, like you said, it's like a cult that you're trying to leave, and there are really heavy penalties for trying to leave a cult, no matter what it is. But this is especially so when it comes to a very protective religion like Islam.
And in a sense, when we become ex-Muslims, in a way, we technically left the cult, but by making it with a death, there's a death penalty. Now we have, and I don't have that here living in America, but I'm imagining if I was over there, which is, by the way, very hard for me to imagine. Having a fear of any of this is hard for me to imagine. I've never had any of it. I never even had fear of hell, by the way, even when I was a Muslim, which is really weird to me too. We could talk about that maybe. Having this thing over your head saying, you can't act like an ex-Muslim. Like, so I'm an ex-Muslim, but I have to act like a Muslim so I don't get in trouble.
Uh, a society that emphasizes conformity and uniformity is definitely going to be enforcing this type of behavior no matter what. You can trace back all the way back to the time of Muhammad, when in Medina he had
1400 years ago.
he had the people he called the hypocrites, which are people who didn't actually accept his rule in Medina, and legitimately so. If you don't want that, and we have to remember that the rule was mainly a kind of a military slash political social rule. You don't want that. This guy came to your town and is creating this other state. So these people started being discriminated against, and they were considered to be traitors, essentially, to the state. And so that's the main thing that is happening when it comes to apostasy in Islam. There is an aspect of treating it as a form of treason, and that's why they consider the death penalty or social death or other forms as kind of a legitimate way of dealing with it.
So the parallel to, let me say it like this. You mentioned treason. I don't know if you said it is treason or like treason,
No,
or
it
in
is
some cases it's being treated as
it is exactly considered as such. It is
okay.
it is treated as treason to the ummah, the nation.
Okay.
Mm.
Uh, what you will find Muslims say in response to this, like when I criticize the idea that Islam has, the death penalty for leaving the religion, they say, well, that's treason and you guys have that too. And now here's the thing. First of all, I don't have a problem with having a law about treason. What I have a problem with is when you treat a whistleblower under the treason law. So let's clarify for people. A whistleblower is someone who blows the whistle about something he knows or she knows in the secret, and who you're trying to protect in this case is America. Okay, a whistleblower, to be specific about somebody, let's say Edward Snowden. He worked for I think it was NSA and multiple departments. And he found out that America, the government, is listening to us, recording our emails, recording our calls, which is illegal in two ways. Illegal, well, the main way is it's against the Constitution. But it was also being done secretively. Okay? So he wanted to expose it to the American people, to protect the American people, to protect our country. That is what the people is the country. The country is the people, not the government.
Mm-hmm.
When we say treason, when the government says we're going to apply the treason law on Edward Snowden, what they're saying is that Snowden is against the country. But no, he's not against the country, and he's not even really against the government. He just wants the government to improve. This is criticism.
Yeah.
Okay, so he should be treated under the whistleblower law. We should have protections for whistleblowers. So it's very different than what the Islam situation is, or and you could think of it this way too. When I'm exposing Islam, and like I said, I'm trying to help people not suffer the way I suffered. I'm trying to help people. This is for the benefit of the collective. This is not to hurt the collective. It's a similar thing that the US is doing. Different scale, different level of whatever you want to call it. I'm not trying to say they're equal, but it's the same in logic.
Yeah, the problem with people who view apostates as traitors is that the level of panic that they usually have of someone who seems to have found out the truth and that they might be bringing that truth to someone else, that's what scares them, that they feel that the whole thing is riding on some precarious foundation that can be easily demolished. So when when that is the case, if they interpret it this way, which is a wrong interpretation, it's a completely wrong interpretation and it's an overreaction, they go into that panic mode, and the way that they think they can deal with the situation is to just stifle that person who's trying to speak up, and just make sure that the problem is completely gone away by making them stop. So
By force.
that's the issue. If you do have the truth, you should not be afraid of hiding it, or you should be able to say, okay, you're saying something of that sort about Islam. Let's bring our own side and confront you in the arena of thought, instead of trying to silence you and stop you from talking.
So, what do you think of the case of the U.S.? Let's say very specifically about how, when Edward Snowden revealed to the American people that our government has been watching us, you know, the whole, the parallel to the Islam situation is, they knew they were doing evil. The U.S. recording us, knowing it's against the Constitution, bypassing the Congress to make a law that would allow them to do it. The reason they kept it secret is they knew no one would let them do it. You get
Yeah.
what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, so maybe that aspect doesn't because if you're looking at true believers, whether in Islam or any other religion, they don't actually believe that they're doing something wrong. And let's actually make this even a little bit wider. Let's think about Nazi Germany. Nazis did not actually necessarily think that they were doing evil. Nobody thinks of themselves, okay, I'm an evil person, or I'm a wrongdoer. They would have a sense of, okay, we are doing something that might be superseding or breaking
Okay.
some
Okay.
moral code, but we think that we have the authority to do that, and that
Okay.
we're
So let me try to argue the U.S. position using the logic you said. So somebody in his position saying, "Look, I know this is against the rules, but we need to do it in order to stop the 9/11 people." Something like that.
yeah, probably.
I don't think that works well.
The
It's
fact
destroying the fabric of everything.
exactly. So in that case, you're actually sacrificing something so big in order to achieve this momentary goal, which in its own constitution is something that has so many wrongs.
So do you think the Muslims are doing the same thing? They believe they're right. They know this little part maybe seems wrong, but the master goal is too important.
Yeah, so the idea that the goal justifies the means is something that is the main principle for something like religion.
The ends justify the means, which
So
is false logic.
what happens there is that the moment that you are submitting, that's the way that you think about Islam to begin with. Islam means submission. The moment that you are submitting to the central idea, that you consecrate the text, the Quran, that you that you present anything or the main ideas of Islam as holy and above reproach, then everything else that follows beyond that is going to be a justification of this main idea.
Even the most extreme evil you can imagine, all of it is okay.
Exactly, exactly. So once you surrender your mind to that idea, It means that even if you feel that you're doing something wrong, even if you feel that this idea goes against something more fundamental in your makeup, that would still be the case, because that would violate.
So do you think that explanation applies to some of the actors in the US? They're trying to protect the US, I guess, as the goal, and they think any means is okay,
They are
including murdering Americans.
they are trying to protect their ideas of their idea of the US,
Yes.
which is not necessarily the same thing as the actual US. And based on that, they would just take license to do whatever they think is necessary in order to achieve that goal. So
It reminds me of the movie You Can't Handle the Truth. He was doing something similar.
yeah, yes, that's true.
Yeah, he knew it was against the rules. Maybe on some level he knows it's also bad, but he has to do it.
Yes. Mhm.
That's the ends justify the means logic. Man, that's interesting. After this, I'm going to be talking to Dr. Wafat about apostasy, blasphemy. I wanted to bring someone to talk about parenting, but I was not successful. So I'm just going to quickly talk about a few things. There are parents who are doing cult behaviors. And one way they do it is a basic way that a lot of people agree with, even therapists argue this, is the united front concept.
Mhm.
You've heard of it?
Yeah. Mhm.
The idea is the father and the mother in front of the children have to look like they're united in agreement about something.
Yeah.
And the reason they do it is if they look like they're in disagreement, then they're let me try to guess what their logic is. Then I guess the kid's not going to obey, something like that. And I don't know if it's obvious to people why that is so bad. It's not helping the child learn how shit the real world works. The real world works, we have disagreements and we have to have a proper method of how to deal with them. We shouldn't beat the shit out of each other. We shouldn't shoot each other. There's, and then, there's steps before that. There's court, but even before court, we should be able to resolve our matters before we get to court and so on, right? So the united front concept is trying to circumvent all of that. It's getting rid of the scientific approach. But another thing they do, and this is worse, and I guess maybe the united front concept came because this other one was going away. The whole idea of scaring the crap out of your children. It's severity wise, it's gone away a lot. Like if you go back 100 years, the level of how parents would scare their children, there was severe beating. Where today you can get in trouble with the government for that. But there's still a little bit of beating. They don't use the word beating, by the way. They call it like spanking. And yeah, I guess it's less fear-inducing, but it's still fear-inducing. And actually, you'll hear parents say this: hitting them once hard. There's a saying, I forgot the saying, but hitting your child once hard is enough to put the fear in him, so you don't have to hit him again. And that's the same logic as I learned this recently from ex-Muslim. Sorry, he's not an ex-Muslim. He's somebody from India, and he was explaining that in Pakistan recently, there was a wave of ex-Muslims, something like 400,000 ex-Muslims in a short period of time. And what Pakistan decided to do was death penalty for like 10 of them. The idea there is it's similar to the parent hit your child once, so you don't have to hit him more. Kill 10 people so you don't have to kill 400,000. Because the point of killing 10 people is now the next person who saw that on the news, they might think twice of being outspoken. So
That's a little bit similar to what I was talking about earlier about the legal system and the punishment, and thinking about maybe the imprisonment as a kind of a punishment and a deterrent to people to not do that thing that they were punished for, which is a silly thing because if you have enough motivation, it's just some basic principles. If you have the motive and the opportunity, you're going to do whatever you want to do, no
there's
matter
people
what.
who say when in context of they want to describe that they want to beat somebody up or hurt them, they say, instead of even saying I want to hurt them, they say I'm willing to do 10 years. So that's exactly what your point is right there. I'm willing to go to jail to beat your ass.
Yeah, so the idea of punishment as deterrent is really a poor idea. It might be something that would give you the satisfaction that you have done something, and it would say satiate something inside you that okay, there's something that's been done, and there's a punishment that happened. But in reality, I don't think.
Well, maybe temporarily there was some success. So, for example, in the Pakistan situation, they killed 10 people. Maybe temporarily there were fewer ex-Muslims. But long term, it's going to make more ex-Muslims.
I would probably say that those who were scared off went underground. It's not that we had less
No, I
ex-Muslims. They
would say
just
maybe there's less ex-Muslims though because there was less speech.
yeah, which is actually that connects exactly to the situation that we're going through right now. The fact that you can see more ex-Muslims, more apostates, more atheists in the Muslim world has to do with the fact that some form of um, space or some alleviation of some of the former restrictions happened. And that happened after what is called the Arab Spring, which was a really false impression of a relaxation of those restrictions, because that's not really what happened. But in any case, that was really responsible for a great deal of what we have seen since 2011. It's not that all of a sudden we have atheists came out of nowhere. They have always been there. It's just that the deterrent that was there in the form of the authority of the government, which included both political and religious aspects, is no longer viewed as the same intimidating figure as before.
Now, what I'll say is, so what I just said is the way they're treating people today, I'm saying is causing more ex-Muslims to happen anyway, right?
Yes,
If
that's
they
true.
became peaceful the way Christianity and Judaism is today, I think a lot of people would remain Muslims.
Yeah, I would agree. Yes.
They wouldn't leave. I kind of have I have like examples in my own life of that kind of thing. Like they don't want to leave, even with all the bad stories, let's say.
That that's
And
that's
part of it is like a familial thing. You know, my whole family is Muslim, so I don't want to get out of the group.
yeah.
And if Islam
Eventually,
was peaceful, that would be happening plenty.
yeah. Religion eventually is an issue of identity, and so if you're willing to actually leave that identity, it means that there's something that's wrong enough in that environment for you to start rethinking a part that constitutes who you are. Because you're I was born a Muslim, but that doesn't mean that I'm a Muslim anymore. It means that I have gone through a process that meant I had to reevaluate a significant
Well, I'm
portion
not
of
even
my
sure
life.
it's fair to say we were born Muslims because when I was born, I didn't know English or Arabic or words or God or Allah or nothing. You know, maybe I was 3 years old, and maybe somebody could start putting ideas in my head. I don't know.
Right. Maybe that's a different situation from
Sure.
growing up in a Muslim country, because then
Oh,
you would have religion hammered into you right from the start.
not from the start though, not day one. So no one's badgering you at day 1, day 2, day 5, nothing.
Well, they declare it for the most part,
Sure,
because
on the books.
on the books, and they symbolically come and say the adhan in your ear.
Oh, I didn't know about that.
For the most part, many people.
Maybe
are.
that didn't happen to me. I don't know. Maybe that was what was wrong.
It's not that you're going to register it anyway, but supposedly this is supposed to be the first thing that you hear anyway.
Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about one more thing. So Richard Feynman said at the end of that speech, or in the middle somewhere, and at the end, he apologized to the world or students going through science classes that we don't teach the scientific approach directly. We've been hoping you learn by example. And so that speech was done in 1974. I wonder if it has improved since then. But I want to say that there have been people since Feynman that are trying to or attempted to outline what is the scientific approach. And one example of that is a man named Eli Goldratt. When he was 20 something years old, he decided to himself that he's going to teach the world how to think. My guess is he watched this speech by Feynman and decided to fix the problem. And what's interesting is, so he came from physics, and he's an Israeli. I don't know where he taught, but apparently some of his buddies in the business department were nagging him with questions all the time. And apparently he was doing well with them. And to the point that he became a business management guru. He died in 2012. And by that point, the name of the body of knowledge that he brought to us goes by the name theory of constraints. Huge amount of the world has learned this theory. I don't know how well they've learned it. I don't think they know it the way I know it, because I understand it deeper than what people are learning, I think, in general. But I have someone on the show today, Eli Schragenheim, who was I see him as like Einstein's closest colleague. Okay, Eli Goldratt being like Einstein. So other than Goldratt, though, just to be clear, we have to bring in, like, when we say what the scientific approach is, a lot of people think that I mean stuff that physicists know as their approach.
Mm-hmm.
As if I'm like, because people will say they'll differentiate between hard sciences and soft sciences, and already they're thinking there's one set of methods in the hard sciences, different set in the soft sciences, and then they completely exclude everything else. Like, so if we're talking philosophy, totally different. If we're talking morality, totally different. If we're talking religion, totally different. Like, they think none of the scientific approach ideas apply outside of, in the extreme case, physics, chemistry, and biology. But the other people who are doing that, who have been doing that, is what we know as epistemologists. People epistemology is the study of knowledge. So you should look there too. And really that's older than what Feynman was talking about. And actually, if you listen to Feynman's comments about the field of philosophy, he thinks it's all crap. But that's because most of it is. Okay? So there's really good epistemologists, though. So one of them is David Deutsch, also happens to be a physicist. I don't think that's a coincidence, by the way. He's a physicist. Really somebody that brought a lot of stuff recent. It's more like Einstein level to me. I mean, I'm not a physicist. I don't work in the field of physics, but I studied physics in university. He discovered quantum computing, and it's not just a theory. People after him, he's a theoretical physicist. He's not a experimental, right? He doesn't do experiments, but he designed the experiments, and people did those experiments, and apparently this stuff is working. And I think there's already quantum computing computers. Like, it's already to the level, it's commercial now. Somebody was telling me Google uses them.
Yeah, there not only Google. There are many different places, and
I think you
quantum
were telling me, actually. I don't remember.
the quantum computing right now is actually on the rise in terms of research everywhere. You have in almost all departments that are doing physics, you can probably see one or two people working on quantum computing in one way or another.
So I just want to clarify for the audience, go read David Deutsch's book, The Beginning of Infinity. He has a second book 10 years before that, The Fabric of Reality. I didn't read that one. I would recommend just reading the newer one. And, this is another way of saying, this is the scientific approach. He doesn't use those words. That's the words I'm using. I'm borrowing from Feynman, And again, if we think of what this approach is, it should be thought of as the methods from physics, from chemistry, from biology, from psychology, from medicine, from medicine, the double-blind experiment, which is designed to get rid of placebo effect. You don't need that in physics. You only need that if your subject that you're studying is humans. So that's why we don't use it in physics, but we have to use it in medicine. And then why you wouldn't cut anything out. The best ideas in theology, the best ideas in morality. And I mean, when I say best ideas, I mean the methods of forming ideas, the methods of testing ideas, not like the end conclusions. Like when we talk about physics, I'm not talking about how does gravity work. I'm talking about the logic of physics, not the physics itself.
Yeah, if I might add one little point here regarding this distinction between hard and soft sciences and why this is the case. So with the idea of a hard science as something that's reliant on really exact and things that might be comparable to how logic is as precise and as um, uh, uh, um, um, uh, as capable of producing really airtight results. That's something that you would get mainly from physics. It becomes diminished in strength as you go away from physics, go into chemistry and biology. But the problem here with the other sciences is not that they're not amenable to this type of reasoning. It's that in a sense that they're actually the real hard sciences, in the sense that they are actually harder than those simpler. So the problems in those sciences are much more complicated, and so being able to find your way through all this maze of complexity and produce the same type of work that you are seeing in physics mainly, but also in other sciences, it's much harder.
So let me clarify it for the audience. Unless you weren't finished, you want to finish?
No, I just wanted to say that I think that if you look at the 20th century, which started with being the century of physics, essentially, that then had some other applications and things that are related from chemistry and biology. But I would probably say that we are now starting in the next stage, which is going to make those other sciences go maybe a few rungs up the ladder, getting closer to becoming more rigorous in the same sense as.
Okay, well, I like what you're saying. The clarification I want to make for people is, so you said in physics, I'm going to use my words here, it's easier to be objective.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people think that, for example, morality is subjective. I think the proper way to look at it is it's everything's objective.
Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of how difficult it is to be objective in that field.
Yeah.
And physics is the easiest one.
Yes.
The other ones are a lot more difficult. So, that I like the way you said that. The hard and soft delineation doesn't make sense. It should be physics easy, everything else harder.
No, and I would add also something to that. So the idea of hard is not only conveying the idea that these are precise sciences. There is something about the general perception of physics as being a hard science, something that is
Oh,
easy to do.
difficult.
But what's actually happening here is that if we want to bring those other so-called soft sciences to the same level of rigor that you have in physics, they would become much harder. And maybe
Well,
in some sense they would simplify, because then you would be talking about a higher level of organization. But the main challenge right now of making these sciences as precise as something like physics comes from the fact that they are more difficult to parse through, to be able to understand to the same level.
so I'll say that when I was going through school, physics was like the easiest thing for me. Okay, I had trouble with like English or metaphors even. I remember going long periods. I didn't know what the fuck a metaphor was, but I was doing really well in physics and math and chemistry and biology. I think everyone else is wrong. I think physics is the easy thing. What's difficult is stuff like morality.
Yeah.
It's so much more hand wavy
Yeah,
than
yeah,
physics is.
I agree. Yes.
So, well, do we have anything more to say? I think we've covered a lot of things. This is way better than I imagined, and all of the episodes have been like that. With Ellie Schragenheim was the same, and I think the same is going to happen with Dr. Wafat sometime.
Yeah, it's been great. It's really enjoyable, and I think that so many of the things that we started talking about could be elaborated on further. But of course, we already have gone through quite a bit.
We won't do that now. Yeah, we'll have multiple episodes later. Well, so for the audience, anyone who would like to talk to Usama or reach out to him, we're going to put his contact information in the description of this video, and you could talk to him that way. Do you have anything else you want to tell the audience?
I just want to wish you all the best with this event. This is something that's important, and I'm really glad that you're doing it. And I really encourage people to follow what you're doing. It's something that is really doing a lot of good.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to say, add a little bit to this, I think what I'm doing is bringing in two categories of people. And they don't have to be separate, but there's the humanitarians and there's the scientists, and they don't have to be separate people. Like Einstein was both. Okay, but the scientists are the ones maybe who care more about the scientific age, and are we being scientific and pseudoscience and all that. And then the humanitarians are, let's not kill people, but they're related. It's one topic. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to unite those two groups.
It's one world, and we're talking about one species of humans at the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess that's it then. Thank you, Usama.
Thanks.
The next one. Thank you. Hello, Usama.
Hello, Rami. How are you?
I'm good. This is really weird having us talking and then talking again like this.
Well, it actually went really nicely. Having watched this again, it's actually nice to have seen the final product together, and finally to have the event actually being launched this way.
Yeah, cool. So, just to remind everyone, this was supposed to be planned where Dr. Wafat Sultan was going to be on this portion. She ended up not being able to do it. We got rescheduled for August, but maybe it might be better actually that Usama is here, because he's a volunteer for this organization. So there might be some discussion that happens here that wouldn't have happened with Wafat.
Well, I think maybe I should clarify here that unlike her, she's an expert who is qualified in areas of psychology, who has had a lot of experience in terms of the public aspects of this. I probably would lack certain aspects that she would be bringing to the table, though I think the fact that I'm also coming from the point of view of an apostate who has also been active, I might also have a different angle, but it's definitely not a replacement of what she would be saying.
Yeah. So, some of it will overlap. Oh, I just realized we kind of skipped the Q&A for the last session, and we only got a couple of questions, and I had set to half hour for this portion, which is definitely unnecessary now. But who knows? Maybe we do expand this to be half an hour. So Sissi said, "Do you think religion will vanish in the future?"
Um, I think there's a very nice analogy between religion and something like the flu or the mosquitoes. They evolved with us, and it's really hard to get rid of them. They have adapted in such a way that they become part of life. They might turn into an annoyance that keeps on nagging for all sorts of reasons. But what I foresee personally is that what would likely happen for religion as we know it is that it's going to become a much smaller institution within society, mainly related to rituals. Some people might still turn to it in hours of.
Spirituality reasons.
I'm sorry.
Spirituality reasons.
Uh, I'm not sure
I mean,
because
that's already happening now. I've noticed.
well, the thing about spirituality is that there is so much more in the market today for spirituality compared to when you look back for just one institution that is supposed to provide your spiritual needs, your material needs, your every need that has to do with every aspect of your life. And
I see what
right.
you're saying. They can get it other places.
Yeah, and
Um,
so for example, you can take a look at the project that Sam Harris has been championing. So Sam Harris has really been into various aspects of Buddhism and meditation, and still he was able to abstract those essential values that are completely devoid of the religious veneration of people, the
of
worship.
the mythological stuff.
Yes. And he was able to abstract that and provide you with that element that religion for so long has had a monopoly over.
Okay.
So something like prayer, we know that prayer is something that actually does have a spiritual value, something that changes the brain in certain ways. The thing is, however, is that it's not the only way that this could happen, and there are so many different ways and activities that you can get the same benefits. Not that those benefits are obtained by everyone, especially when it comes to something like the ritualistic type of prayer that we have in Islam. But in general, it's something that you can extract from so many other activities, and that's exactly what's happening here. So it's possible to have spirituality, to have those needs being provided in so many different other ways. Now, I know that there are other aspects that people do miss, and I have personally tried to explore a little bit in terms of that with what's known as the Sunday Assembly. Are you familiar with it?
Sunday assembly? No.
Okay, so here's what the Sunday Assembly is. It's, I think, I forgot where it started first, but it's basically a kind of an alternative assembly that happens on Sundays for people who still miss the sense of.
Atheist church.
Exactly.
Okay.
The sense of community that people have in church. Now, I personally never actually missed that aspect in Islam, but having lived in a place that actually does have an assembly, I went there a few times along with my family because they did have children activities and things of that sort. You have a TED talk instead of a sermon. You have
It's the same thing, though. It's the same thing. They're trying to teach some moral lessons.
yeah. So you have that. You have some singing happened actually. So
Social gathering, fun stuff. Yes,
exactly. There was a meal, I believe, if I'm not.
and Americans. I don't know about the entire West, but I know about America more than anything. They're starving for that kind of stuff. There isn't enough of it. If I just do a comparison, okay, I'm not Syrian, but I've been there, and I have Syrian family, and like I said, in 10th grade, I was there for a year, and then I was there for 6 months at age 26. Little bits and pieces. And one huge difference between there and here is in Syria, it's very normal, like almost basically every day, to go visit somebody's house.
Yeah,
you're a family member. We a big family, so it's and then sometimes there's friends too. But you could just you could fill up the whole year with just your family, okay? And in America, there's not a lot of that. I think there's a lot of American families that do like it, but they're not getting enough of it. Part of it is they live so far away. Like when it's very normal to find work that's not in your hometown, where in Syria there's not much working anyway. So everyone's at home, everyone's close by, especially in the town I'm from, Aleppo, Syria, which is it's 5 million people. You think it acts like a big city. It's very much closed to the rest of the world. It's not the capital like Damascus. There's not a lot of people moving in and out of it. Not even just for vacation or traveling temporary, but even moving at all. Like people just stay in one city pretty much, generation after generation. Very different than America. And so the point is, in America, where there's people starved for this kind of social gatherings, going to church to get it instead makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. And so I guess there's the atheist church. What'd you call it?
Sunday assembly. It started first. I'm trying to remember where it was at the beginning, but it has proliferated, and I believe there are certain branches right now in Europe. Though in Europe, to begin with, there has been a dissolution of the church, and people have been only using the church as a kind of a social gathering place. So it never actually really dissipated the same way that it's disappearing here in the US. By contrast, over there, you can still see people who don't believe at all still go to church for the social aspects.
Really?
Yes.
And they don't do that here, you're saying?
Yeah. In the US, if you're going to church, you are going to church very often.
I mean, I've never really been to church, so I don't really know. But where are you getting your information from? Your Christian friends?
Well, I've lived in the South for a while, and that's mainly my experience from the south of the U.S.
Okay.
On the West Coast, this doesn't seem to be the situation anymore. But my general impression is that, especially in the South, when people are going to church, of course there is the social aspect, but there is also a religious dimension nonetheless. You go, and there are churches everywhere. Churches represent part of the society. It's not just
well, they're doing more than we said so far something about religion, and we said social gathering. They're doing more than that. They do stuff like people are poor, don't have a house, don't have food. They're taking care of those things.
Yes.
And of course there are organizations that do that, dedicated, like in the city I'm in right now, Peoria, Illinois. There's a place called the Dream Center. And if you're homeless for a night or however long, you go there to get help. It's Christians, okay? It's not the church, but it's Christians that are doing it. They're at it. I'm sure those people go to a church.
And I can attest also for something like that on the Muslim side. If it weren't for that social / welfare dimension that those religious organizations do provide, I think they would have a really hard time just surviving at this moment. They have to be providing something back for society, and this is definitely one.
And I want to be clear to everyone. I have a very high opinion of what they're doing. Okay, like the Dream Center, and feeding people when they're hungry, don't have food. Okay, and I do believe the government should be more involved in this stuff. But even if they're not, somebody needs to be doing it. That's my point.
Yeah,
somebody.
No,
You
you're
shouldn't have
absolutely
people on
right.
the streets. I actually want to dig deep into that some other day. Not now. About welfare and how to solve it. A couple things you mentioned I want to hit on, still on this same question. You talked about prayer, and you were talking about Sam Harris, and I think the link you were making is meditation.
Mhm.
Okay, I speak very highly of meditation. I've never done it, but from what so I watched a podcast between it was the Joe Rogan podcast. It was Sam Harris and another guy named Harris. I don't remember his first name.
Oh, okay.
Remember it? Isn't that crazy? We can remember such things. It's years ago.
Chris Harris. I know who you were talking about.
So in this little podcast, they were talking about meditation, and the way they explained it really made a lot of sense to me. Previous to that podcast, what I thought of meditation is it's just mythology. It's so like just tricking yourself kind of thing, more like hypnosis or anything. And hypnosis is not good, and let's not talk about that now. But so meditation, even if we don't use the word meditation, it's kind of like journaling, but without a piece of paper. And linking it to prayer now, when you're praying, when you're meditating, you can be making some decisions about your life, as opposed to like if you weren't doing those things, you're kind of just operating on autopilot. Operating on autopilot in general, just doing that. Imagine there's a movie like this actually. It's called Click or something. Adam Sandler. Do you know the movie? The movie is about there's this magical remote control, and it controls more than just this.
Yeah, I don't know the plot. But I've seen the poster.
There's this magical remote control, and it controls his life, and he gets to do things like fast forward because something is boring. Okay, well, it was glitching, and it would happen for years. He would fast forward through a few years of his boring life, and then it was passing him by, and he wasn't liking that. This is how people are actually living in a lot of cases. They live on autopilot for years, and then every once in a while they wake up and go, "What the hell have I been doing?" Everyone, if you haven't watched that movie, go watch that movie. Prayer and meditation and things like that are about trying to have some control over that, over having some conscious control instead of just autopilot your whole life,
True. In the case of Sam Harris, there are so many other implications also that follow from this, because it's part of his entire worldview. Things that have to do with compassion, with the dissolution of the ego, the lack of free will, the consideration of how others are actually objects of compassion. And so it's a kind of a whole worldview that is very definitely viable, and it's completely devoid of that religious aspect. It's something that you reason about, but at the same time that you can experience. I personally cannot say that I can directly relate to many of these things. I have tried meditation; it never worked. But as they describe it, it's something that requires a lot of perseverance, a lot of hard work. But at the end, it seems that the rewards are very great, and many people just testify that it's something that is an important element in their life.
So I'd like to talk more about meditation, but man, we might be going too deep. I want to summarize kind of this thing with religion real quick. So religion started, I don't know how many thousands of years ago. It started to solve a problem, okay? Everything is like that. Everything is an intended solution to a problem. And it developed over time, people infusing new ideas into it, solving more problems. You named a few of them, like the social gathering thing, the church concept, the prayer, meditation, that stuff. So if you consider, how are we going to have a world without religion? It would have to be where all those good things that religion did solve somehow are still with us somewhere else.
Yes.
So this is another way of saying you cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So take as an example the role that religion has played in regulating society in place of laws. So in ancient times, you didn't actually have laws as such. Rather, you had a kind of a mixture of a religious authority that also has something like the Ten Commandments. It's something that appears to be in the form of a moral code, but in reality, it's actually a mixture of laws and ethics, things that can regulate human life. And so right now we have modern laws that have incorporated all these aspects, and you don't go to a religious a person or a religious court or somebody of people who implement religious ideas in order to adjudicate any of these things. This is something that has been completely taken over by civil society.
So what you're saying here is one of the things already got solved away from religion, although Islam is not doing it. So I want to be more clear for people. So the first religions, I don't know, let's say 6,000 years ago, right? The first civil laws, is that Hammurabi?
I would say, although some people might say that there are some precursors, but yeah, okay. we can go there, but it's not.
And when was that?
It's definitely not 6,000 years.
Yeah. It's newer than that is the point, which is what you were saying earlier. Religion was the first institution that started having civil laws. And I guess what are civil laws? It's sort of back then was it just a set of punishments? One of the punishments, one of the laws of Hammurabi was if a man rapes a woman, the husband of that woman that got raped now gets to rape the rapist's wife. It's insane. Now, here's the thing. That's a bad law, but just the idea of having civil laws is an amazing thing. Having some laws that everyone in the area has to follow.
And notice actually today how this appears in a kind of a modern guise. Religious people would come to us and say, religion is the one that invented morals and ethics, and atheists have absolutely no basis for that. How is it that you're going to be running your life without a source of authority to tell you what is it that you're supposed to be doing? And so this is a kind of a true misunderstanding of what's actually ethics, what roles it plays and how it develops and how people implement it. But it is a very common argument that they try to bring up against people who don't follow religion.
So let me shoot them down real quick. You said source of authority. And earlier in that interview we did about the scientific age, you mentioned Aristotle. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas we were talking about that he brought to us was the idea that in order for you to consider a piece of knowledge, in order to treat it as true, you have to back it up with some other piece of knowledge that you already know to be true. Mm-hmm. And that is your authority. That is your source of authority. And religions took that and went further and said, our source of authority is God. So And what I told you about Aristotle's idea of being wrong, and the guy who corrected it, Karl Popper, something not even 100 years ago, recognized there is no source of authority. What we have instead is the scientific approach, which is the opposite of it, which is we guess ideas and we chop them down. We don't prop them up.
Yeah.
We chisel them. We add in ideas and we chisel them. We rule out things. We test them. People get confused about the concept of even evidence, which is actually the next question here. People think evidence is used to select a theory from many. So they say this piece of evidence tells us that this theory is true. But it's not like that. Evidence is a ruling out method. It's a negative method.
Yeah.
And what you can do with it is to rule out a set of theories from many, necessarily leaving in many, not one. And it could be just one that you know of, and the rest are things you haven't thought of yet.
Yeah, many people confuse what evidence is with mathematical proof. So, for example, they think that, okay, you have demonstrated some claim about the natural world through a few experiments that, okay, this has proved the idea. Of course, this is not the case. What you have is a lack of this confirmation until the next experiment comes about. And that's the ongoing cycle. You never prove anything. You always are subjecting your ideas and theories to tests. If those tests disconfirm it, then that's the role of the evidence. That's the definitive role of the evidence. The evidence doesn't at any point fully confirm or establish a theory beyond doubt.
So I just realized now while you were talking that this question by itself needs its own episode. I think we should schedule that someday. I think for now we'll stop this question and move on to the next one, okay? This is another question by Sissi. I hope I'm saying that right. One thing I don't understand is how do religious people believe that they know exactly what happens after death, and then they added when there is no evidence. And so what do you have to say about that?
Well, it's if these people have established their whole belief system based on faith in something they have never seen, what needs to be done is for you first to basically sign that piece of paper. Okay, whatever you're going to be saying next, I'm going to approve that. That's essentially what happens in religion. And so take a sacred text as an example. The sacred text, if you're just looking at it rationally, you can very easily completely demolish it with a modern perspective. But if you have surrendered your will to go and do this investigation, do this scrutiny in the first place, then whatever this text is going to say is going to be sacred no matter what. In fact, you're going to do your utmost.
I think that's true. There are people doing that, but I want to describe another category of people. I don't think I fit in that. I think I fit in this next category I'm about to explain. So I was saying earlier in the interview about the scientific age that I was living in a bubble. I didn't know people that believed in jinn and demons and weird shit like that. But I was the guy that believed in God. So, but I wasn't doing what you're saying. I was still thinking rationally, hey, I was thinking independently from the concept of God. When I was looking at anything, let's say evil eye, the concept of evil eye.
Mm-hmm.
I when I would think about the idea, I don't think in my head, well, God says it's real, therefore it's real. I'm not even thinking of God when I do that, And I'm actually remembering the history of my thoughts on this. I remember the first time I heard about evil eye. I didn't hear it in the context of religion. I heard it, my mom said it, okay? And I didn't know where she got it, and I didn't ask her where she got it. I knew she got it from, I know the phrase "old wives' tales." I knew she got it from other people. I don't. She didn't tell me she read it in a book called the Quran. Although I don't think that would have worked on me anyway. I want to
Well,
tell you. Go ahead.
no, about this, it's not necessarily that they believe in God and then they derive all that stuff from that authority. They So what happens is that you're brought up in a certain cultural milieu, and based on whatever you're getting from that culture, you're going to have certain implicit authority figures and sources of authority that you don't question anything that these sources of authority are going to be providing you, um, uh, simply because if you're going to be questioning that, you're going to be questioning your sense of belonging to the group. And so belonging to the group is far more important, and provides a sense of intuitiveness to all these aspects that are just hoisted.
And are you saying that in order to satisfy my urge to belong to a group, I have to also believe what they believe?
Yeah, essentially.
At least in this form.
You
I'm
don't
sure
have,
there's the opposite of that. I'm sure there's groups that the idea is to have differing beliefs.
yeah, but when it comes to that, the very idea of God doesn't even enter the picture. If you look at the typical life of a believer and compare it to the life of an atheist, it's not really that different. People start thinking about God only when there is actually some friction. Like a typical Muslim would never think about the idea of the existence of God until they encounter someone who is doubting the existence of God. But it's not something that they invoke or think about in their everyday life.
And let me add one more thing. You just mentioned the atheists. There are plenty of atheists who treat scientific claims, or claims that are claimed to be scientific, in the same way that a lot of theists believe in God.
Yes.
Meaning just appeal to authority. Okay?
Yeah.
But I think there are theists who don't do that. They are using logical reasoning to arrive at the conclusion that there's a God. And even if it's the wrong conclusion, they're doing something that's not appeal to authority. They're doing their own independent reasoning.
I would say that it's all marred with a lot of confirmation bias. Take a look at, for example, Saint Augustine or Rene Descartes, and how at the end of their philosophical journey, all of a sudden, they end up where they started. It's all about God. If you want an even worse example, take Hegel in the 19th century. He started with some really broad philosophical ideas, and then at the end of his conclusion, it turned out that the Prussian monarchy was the pinnacle of all existence, of all that philosophical
Oh, wow. Okay, so you're reminding me of something very common that I've been talking about recently, which is you'll see people, theists, let's say a Muslim or a Christian, they'll argue against atheism, and then when they're done arguing against atheism, they say, therefore Islam. Which makes no sense, because the only thing you're arguing there is that there is a God that made the universe, but no other features.
No, it's not even a God. It's a creator. Jumping from a creator to a God, that's
Well, I don't know the difference between creator and God. The point is, one feature is there. There's a thing, whatever it is, with no features yet. The only feature we're giving it made the universe, and then no more features. For you to jump from there to Islam or Christianity, that's the confirmation bias stuff.
Yeah,
you're not actually, because the way it would work, you'd have to do it this way. Every feature that you add in there, you better have good reasoning for it. Every single feature, and Islam has like a million features for God.
Yeah, you want someone who actually does really nice acrobatics with trying to produce some fake logical justifications of things, It's William Lane Craig. He is such an acrobat. He teaches philosophy. He has debated so many atheists, and he's well spoken. He's considered to be one of the most important Christian apologetics today.
Okay.
But if you really look down at it, when you try to justify belief in crucifixion as something on a philosophical level, not something that's based on a historical fact, but just at a philosophical level, you're stretching things too much. Revering the personality of Jesus and what he has done is one thing, and then going to those broad ideas of philosophy and then claiming that there's some kind of a logical deduction that goes from those arguments and then end up with the importance of crucifixion. This is this is too much.
So I just looked at the time. We did use the whole half hour. I'm surprised. 2 questions. So yeah, let's stop here and move on to the next session.